I'm going to get my nut on this trip, Miles, and you are not going to fuck it up for me with all of your depression and anxiety and neckhead downer shit.
Oh, well, now the cards are on the table.
Yes, they are.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a great film. We explore its themes, the history, the filmmaking, and the influence it has on us today. My name is Steve Morris, and I am a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Rocha. I'm a writer, producer, host, and voiceover artist here in San Diego, California, and retired wine aficionado, although after our conversation and getting ready for this movie, Steve, I imagine I'm going to come out of retirement and walk back into the world of wines here after we're done.
I can see you starting to put a collection of bottles behind you, and that in addition, one of the other shows on Outlaw Nation is going to be a wine show. You have little tastings and stuff. I think this is a whole new direction for the channel.
Can you imagine? Tonight we're going to be opening a Syrah, a 1995 Syrah.
Dude. I'm sure there are a million YouTube channels doing exactly that right now.
Outlaw Wines. Yeah, it could be a lot of fun for sure.
Oh, Outlaw Wines, dude.
Listen, there was a whole branding thing. If the Schmoedown had kept going, I would have gotten into everything. Outlaw energy bars, outlaw vodka, outlaw everything, man, for God's sake.
Well, in addition to subscribing to the Outlaw Nation on YouTube, you also might want to check out patreon.com/the Cine-Files, which is a great way to support the show. And of course, you have access to ad-free versions of the show, our Cine-File shorts, our watch-alongs, which are coming back. And I should say our very first watch-along of the year is going to be Dragnet. So if you want to hear John and I finally talk about Dragnet, the place is patreon.com/the Cine-Files. Of course, you can also support us on Apple Podcasts, and that is what keeps the show going.
Thank God it's Friday. I can't wait till we talk about Dragnet. Yes, and another way you can support the show, of course, is you listen to our sponsors here in between the breaks on the show. And you guys have heard many wonderful sponsors over the last few years who've supported us here on the Cine-Files. And if you want to patronize any of their products or try any of their products out, please make sure you use our code. It's really important because it lets them know that you all are watching and listening and are interested in trying out their stuff. And that's going to keep them coming back to support us here as we go into the new year in 2025. And certainly we want to attract more and more sponsors. We want to attract bigger and bigger sponsors. And you guys patronizing their stuff is another way that we can make that happen here on the channel.
And John, right? Yeah. As we're coming into the new year, we were figuring out our schedule and we had some plans in place, and you kind of called an audible because you wanted to jump in a different direction. You want to tell us the direction that we've jumped in?
Yeah, let's pull the curtain open a little bit and behind the scenes on the Cine-Files. It's no surprise that coming out of 2024, going into 2025, that winter break was a much needed holiday winter break. You guys got 4 Rankin and Bass specials that we recorded, or was it 3 or was it 4? 3. I think it was 4. 3? 3. Okay, so 3 Rankin and Bass specials. But then we compiled a bunch of shorts with a new intro from me to start off the year. So we had brought you guys essentially 4 new shows to a degree here for you all. And then we took the week off last week, and we were considering, how do we walk into 2025? And there were these plans for this. We've got Mad Max Fury Road on the calendar. And I was like, I didn't feel like we needed to start off with a post-apocalyptic film that was, possibly super depressing, although inspiring by the end. And so I thought, why don't we just do a comedy, Steve? And I remember texting you this during one of the days of the holidays, and I was like, why don't we just do a simple comedy? And you were like, great, yeah, you pick the comedy, and if you want to lead it, feel free. And I'm like, great, yes, I'll pick a comedy. I'll pick something really fun that we can do, and a film I enjoyed, and you enjoyed as well. And I said, let's do Sideways. This seems like a pretty fun comedy to do. And since you're a big foodie, being a what they call, quote unquote, a wino or a wine lover, it's not that much of a difference in terms of the approach to something like this. And I thought for me, I always loved Paul Giamatti, and I love this comedy, and I love Alexander Payne, the Holdovers being something I rewatched again over this winter break. So I thought this would be great. Well, Steve...
I feel like you've been through some stuff.
I've been through some stuff because I completely underestimated how much of a simple, fun comedy this movie actually is. This is such an extensive film. I worked so hard to try to get all things lined up. I don't know if I'm going to get it right, but I think what gives me confidence is I have a great partner who, of course, has led the show many, many times. So I hope we deliver hopefully two parts of really good episodes on this film and do it justice, because we are also in the we just crossed the 30th anniversary of it, right? Because 20th anniversary, because it came out in 2004. So today we are starting part one of our deep dive into Alexander Payne's Sideways movie. So yeah, Steve, I clearly did not pick a simple comedy.
It's so funny that you kept describing this as a fun comedy. And it's like, that's not how I would ever have described this movie. It is genuinely funny throughout, but it's funny while being horribly sad and really upsetting in lots and lots of ways. And of course, I think this is going to be great, although it is funny. Like, it's sort of, those plays where I know like actors were doing True West or something, and then they would switch roles.
Yeah.
Switching roles is hard. Like, I actually have the same thing of going through, because I have a very, very well worked out system when I'm doing the play-by-play, because you have to be really organized, as you know, like to really kind of tell the whole story. And now I don't have a really good system for being the color commentator. Like I took a lot of notes, but I don't know, because it's much more, it's hard for me to seed control and to just go with the flow that you're going to establish. So and I think it's great, because it's both of us stretching our wings and adjusting how we do the show. And that's always what makes it really, really exciting.
Usually I'm the John Madden, you're Pat Summerall. This time you're the John Madden to my Pat Summerall. So I want to see you drawing on the telescope.
I was going to say, can I draw? Can I make some diagrams here?
Right here. He drinks the wine. Boom. Right here. Boom.
And when do we get our big video game tie-in that goes every year? Come on.
Cine-Files 95. I'd be down with that. I'd absolutely be down with that. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are diving into Sideways. I hope you all please bear with me as I lead this one, and I hopefully, as I said, do it justice. But it's going to be a lot of fun, and I really do love this movie. And revisiting it to discuss on our show, Steve, made me fall in love with the film even more. And I think, when I saw it in 2004, so I'll just say that from the beginning. When I saw this in 2004 in a movie theater, probably with some friends there in Los Angeles, I can't remember who I went to see it with, probably Mike, probably Shannon, probably Ian, probably other people. I just remember just loving the movie, and it sparked my interest in wine, but it wasn't until much, much later in a previous relationship than the one I'm in now, where I really discovered the power and mystery of wine. But I just remember loving this movie, loving Paul Giamatti, being happy for Thomas Haden Church, who I had enjoyed in the 90s on Wings, and being introduced to Sandra Oh, and seeing the comeback of Virginia Madsen. This is, people talk about Travolta in Pulp Fiction, people talk about Robert Forster, people talk about other people coming back, and of course Demi Moore this year with Substance, or this past year with The Substance. This was such a great window of time where Virginia Madsen, who a lot of us grew up in the 1980s, came back for a little bit here and got her her flowers, basically, her much earned, very well deserved flowers for the work she did in this movie. So, Steve, tell me, what was your first time seeing Sideways, and do you remember it?
It's so funny, because we talked about how post 2011, when my son was born, the odds are I didn't see that movie in the theater. Like my movie watching went way down. But pre that, and particularly in the early 2000s, I saw everything. I was always going out to the movies, and I definitely saw this in the theater with Karen, I think with Matt Garcia and maybe Josh Haber, which are friends of mine from film school. Right. And this was exactly the kind of independent film that I absolutely love. You know what I mean? Of just, here is an amazing character study. It's totally unique. The performances are off the charts great. Yes. Particularly the central four characters. They're really, really good. And it is a moving, complicated, really, really funny movie. And I absolutely love it. And I hadn't seen it again until I started prepping for the show.
Yeah, what's amazing about this too, Steve, is the stage of where we find Alexander Payne doing this movie, right? I mean, Citizen Ruth is the one that really kind of announced him to a degree to a lot of the indie people and people who were watching independent film back in 1996, with him and Laura Dern leading the way in that movie. Then he comes out 3 years later with Election from Reese Witherspoon, and that got more and more attention. But then About Schmidt in 2002 with Jack Nicholson Now people know who this person is. He got Jack Nicholson to deliver a performance that he has never delivered in the history of his career. And I think he was nominated for that. And Kathy Bates was fantastic in that movie as well. So now he moves into something a little bit smaller 2 years later in Sideways, and yet has an incredible cultural impact, which we're going to get to here as we talk about the movie in 2004. So it's a fascinating point in his career. This is like right into the prime time of Alexander Payne as a filmmaker that is known by most of the mainstream.
And since this is our first Alexander Payne movie, we thought we'd give a little bit of biographical material. He was born in 1961 in Omaha, Nebraska. And that, to me, it just so makes sense, is that Midwestern, kind of down-to-earth, but artistic filmmaker guy. He's another one of these people whose dad gave him that Super 8 camera when he was 14 and started making films. He went to Stanford, where he studied Spanish and history. He got his MFA in film from UCLA in 1990. So he's like 7 years ahead of me, basically, in terms of our film school. He did a bunch of short films and then got a deal at Universal, gets paid $60,000 for a script that they ended up passing on, which meant the rights went back to him. And that actually is about Schmidt. That was and so he wrote that for them. Couldn't get any other work. You want to know where he was working for a few years after the Universal deal ended?
Please.
Making films for the Playboy Channel.
Hey-o. Wait, directing?
Directing.
Wow.
And it makes me go like, I would love to see what exactly he did, because he could, a gig's a gig. Like sometimes you need to get a gig and make some money. So he did that. And then as you mentioned, Citizen Ruth, which I didn't realize was a Sundance film. And I don't think of him as coming out of that Sundance tradition, but he's actually one of those guys too,
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned some of the films, Election and About Schmidt, getting to Sideways. What was really interesting doing research on him, rarely on a Wikipedia page do they list all the things that didn't happen. But there is a huge list of movies that didn't get made that Alexander Payne had writing and spent years doing. And it always makes me think of the Island of Misfit Toys. It's the Island of Misfit Screenplay. There are all these movies that exist in an alternate universe that might have been better than Sideways or better than The Holdovers. We have no idea why they didn't go anywhere. Two of them I did see was he did brush-up work on Meet the Parents, which I find kind of fascinating. And he wrote a draft for a little movie called Jurassic Park 3.
Wow.
His was thrown out. They went a completely different way with Jurassic Park 3. But it's like, again, I go even more that I want to see the Alexander Payne films on the Playboy Channel. But I would love to see an Alexander Payne version of Jurassic Park. That would be amazing.
It's probably much more toned down, and the dinosaur is a guy in a costume. Probably. I would imagine as an allegory for something else.
It's an allegory.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Alexander Payne's Jurassic Park. Oh my God, that's genius. I would love that. Yeah, I remember Citizen Ruth because I remember that was an abortion topic there in the mid-90s. I think I saw that on HBO because I didn't see it in theaters. I saw it on HBO, I believe. And then from there, Election is the one that both infuriated me and then challenged me to understand what he was trying to say, because I hated Reese Witherspoon in that movie. Just hated her and what she represented. And of course, there was a sequel, which the less said about that, the better. Right. But it was the rebirth of Matthew Broderick again, right? This was what brought him kind of back into people's consciousness there. And then, as I said, about Schmidt, what right at that beginning time when I'm like coming to LA and I'm really into, getting into film, becoming an actor on film. I'm really a mad lover of film. And so seeing Jack Nicholson, who was an actor I'd enjoyed for so many years, do a performance like this just utterly blew me away. And the human approach to cinema, and this was much more prevalent back then than it is now. Not that we still don't make human films now. Obviously, Alexander Payne having just done The Holdovers a year and a half ago. There were many more of these human films that were out there to be consumed in the mainstream. And About Schmidt was one of those. And then Sideways happens, and it was so excellent. And then a few years later, Descendants, which is one of my favorite films for so many reasons. And then Nebraska, which I thought was a great companion piece with David Lynch's The Straight Story. I think you watch those two back to back as like really interesting human films about older people kind of navigating the world and figuring things out with some weird human comedy. Downsizing is the only one that I don't like of his, which I was utterly terrible. And then, of course, he comes back with The Holdovers, which was an awesome, awesome film that got a lot of Oscar love and a lot of love from filmgoers. So to me, this is a guy who has a fantastic track record and is quietly challenging while also telling these very deeply personal human interest stories that you could judge the characters, but they're much more fulfilling if you just accept them and their intricacies and their hypocrisies and their foibles, and look at yourself at the same time and be like, who am I to judge watching these people, because I too have certain instincts that are like this, or I too have made mistakes like this. And so I've always found that to be the gift of his movies, is that he tells truths in a way that really make us uncomfortable. And if you turn off the judgment part of it, you might find yourself connecting with these characters in very deep ways, and maybe even feeling sympathy for them, even though you abhor some of the actions they take in the movies.
No, that's the thing about him, and you see it in all of his films, is that I think, and it sounds strange that this is like a radical thing in film, but particularly today, but he really loves people.
Yes.
And he loves people, warts and all. Yeah. Like, he does it like the Holdovers is also a perfect example. Those are messed up, not always very nice, like difficult people, and you completely fall in love with them. And that is certainly true of Sideways. And that is a thing where, because what a lot of people want to go like, here's the bad guy. Look, this is what is good and this is what is evil. And we want to just have her. And that's not what Alexander Payne's interested in. He's like, these are people. They're all real, and we can love them even despite a lot of things. And I went back and forth so much watching Sideways going, well, who is the more obnoxious of these two people? I kept going like, well, oh my God, why is he still friends with this guy? And then 10 minutes later, I'm like, no, why are they friends with him? Like, oh my God, like they're both such fucked up people. And yet, do I love them? Yeah, I do. I do, despite everything that happens in the movie and choices that are made. And it's like, yeah, you still love them.
Yeah, just like in real life. Like I said, if you look at, it's easy to judge them, but then if you look at some of the mistakes you've made, you kind of go, well, should I be judging them? Because I have done some things like this, versions of this myself, or variations of this myself. And I think that's what's fascinating about his movies, man. It's so great to see. All right, so let's do a little pre-production on this, Steve. Unless you have more about Alexander Payne.
Nope.
Okay, great. Nope. So Alexander Payne was flying back from Edinburgh, where he had been at a film festival promoting Election, which was back in 1999, when he finally had the chance to read Rex Pickett's book, Sideways. Now, by the way, it had not been published. He had been given this book as a possibility, and he was maybe going to consider to do as a film. Well, as soon as he landed, Payne ran to a payphone to call his agent about purchasing the rights. He later told Pickett he liked the novel because his characters were, quote, so fucking pathetic. So, maybe not wrong. And the source novel by Rex Pickett, as I said, remained unpublished until Payne bought the film rights. So kind of like a little bit like with 2001, like it was published in the same year as the film came out. So it's really interesting. The novel was released a month before the film premiered, and of course is different from the novel. The novel is different from the film in certain ways, but overall, it's a pretty faithful adaptation here. And when Payne was asked about what made him want to adapt the book in an interview in the past, he said, "I've had the question a few times, and here's what I've been saying. Oh, I like the humanity of the characters and the comic set pieces and the wine aspect because I like wine and those gals, and it seemed like it would be a lot of fun to make. But I'll add another big reason is that it didn't seem like the adaptation would be very hard because I don't know if you've glanced at the novel or anything, but it's pretty much laid out. Jim and my adaptation was very faithful. I mean, you always have to spend a lot of time on it to shape it into a movie and add and subtract and all that. But I thought, gosh, this wouldn't be a terribly difficult adaptation." And when he was asked, well, does that mean it was easy? He goes, no, I just mean it was less hard. That's a good.
It's never easy.
Yeah, I'm sure it is, especially adapting, right? And
yeah.
But he also cites Il Sorpasso, which is The Easy Life, if you translate it, as a big inspiration for Sideways and the way he shot it. He said the film, quote, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And Il Sorpasso showcases the humanity of Italy according to Payne. And while watching the film, quote, you really get to see Italy in 1962. And so he wanted to bring out this area of winemaking, the Santa Barbara, San Ynez, all this area. He wanted to really bring it out and bring it to life in the movie. It was filmed over 10 weeks in Santa Barbara in October, November of 2003. And he also liked that it was kind of a buddy comedy and that it was kind of a small movie. And he liked Miles' constant depression throughout the whole film. There is some sadness in it, but there's a scene where Miles has to steal a wallet and a naked man comes running after him. It's stuff like that made me want to do it. And it hooked me into the characters and the situations. And I just love those two guys. So yeah, that was pretty much the pre-production. Of course, we'll have a little bit more as we get into the film about who was cast and how they were cast and all of that. But that's the basic pre-production on this. There wasn't too much behind it. He just read the novel, really liked it, got the rights, which got the book published, and then went about adapting it with his co-writer, Jim Taylor here. And they became made guys off this movie. They essentially were looked at to, as you said, brush up stuff or write stuff, or be looked at to take a pass at stuff. So this film is a very seminal and important film in Alexander Payne's career.
I think it's just what you said. It solidifies him as like, oh, this is a filmmaker that must be watched.
Yes.
And it is fun. I mean, it's, what Alexander Payne said about how he picked the movie actually echoes some of the things you were saying and why you picked it to do it on the show, And what I'll say is, like, in both cases, it seems simple, but it really isn't. Well, and part of it is just, the performances he gets out of these people, that's what makes it. It's not showy, but it is, there's so much there.
Stephen, I want to say something before we jump into the movie. And it just occurred to me when I was working on doing the notes and everything like this, like, sometimes we hear about new people coming to our show, right? They try it out for the first time. So I just want to thank everybody new who's been listening so far and taking a chance on our show. And what we do with the show is we break it down scene by scene. That's what we do in this show. So if you haven't seen the movie, you could stop now, go and watch the movie. But a lot of you stay on to listen to us talk about a film, even if you've never heard of it or never seen it. So I just want to give you a quick synopsis. This film follows two men in their 40s, a depressed teacher and an unsuccessful writer, and an actor, past his prime actor, who take a week-long road trip to Santa Barbara County wine country to celebrate one of their upcoming weddings. So this is what the basic genesis of the film is, or foundation of the film is. So just to let you know before we get into the film, Steve. So are you ready?
I am prepared. I don't have a glass of wine with me. I feel a little remiss, but I am ready to go.
We might need a glass of wine after this. All right. So we open in black frame as we hear a voice in the dark waking up to some loud banging on his door. The voice is clearly not happy. The banging continues as the opening credits appear on screen, with the final bangs accompanying the title card, sounding and looking like keys being hit on a typewriter, which is a nice allusion to what our main character does. I don't know if you caught that before, Steve, but this is the first time I ever caught it, that the title appears kind of like you're typing it out on a typewriter, which was really surprising to me.
I love that little treatment. And no, I hadn't caught it before. Watching this time as I was going over it, I did.
Yeah.
Miles, can you move your car, please?
Why?
Because the roofer's got to get the truck in. You didn't park the roof, okay?
This gentleman says, okay, and then slams the door as we cut to a graphic that reads Saturday. Now, Steve, we know that when a film starts off presenting us with a little bit of time construct, we know that now this is going to be done, it's going to be told through days, not hours, not minutes, through days. So what do we call that in filmmaking when they do it that way?
I don't know if there's a name. You stumped me. Like, I mean, I would call it, you're putting titles of the days on. It is called a Chiron, is what that title is called.
Sure.
But no, I got nothing for you. I failed.
All right. Well, we're on a day's timeline for sure. And now we see this person who had opened the door, walking down the stairs in his slippers, shirt, some sort of shorts, I think, or maybe boxer briefs, and his robe. And this is Miles, played by Paul Giamatti.
So this is our first Paul Giamatti movie, as far as I know. I can't remember now at this point every actor that is in everything, but certainly it's our first starring Paul Giamatti. What an incredible actor. And again, just a little bit of biographical material. I mean, he is a Emmy winner. He's won 3 Golden Globes, 2 Oscar nominations. He was born in New Haven, Connecticut, to a very interesting father.
Yes.
In fact, I think you probably have much more knowledge of Angelo Giamatti than I do, and probably knew the name before you knew the name Paul Giamatti.
I 100% knew Bart Giamatti before I knew Paul Giamatti, because Bart Giamatti was the commissioner of Major League Baseball for a time in the 80s, and he is most famously known for banning Pete Rose, the late Pete Rose, from baseball for betting on baseball. So that his name is inextricably linked till the end of time with Pete Rose.
And Bart Giamatti was a Yale professor who became the president of Yale. And of course, that's where Paul Giamatti went to get his BA and then his MFA as an actor in Yale. What's so interesting looking at his career, he's in so many things.
Yeah.
Just in small parts before we knew who he was. He's in Mighty Aphrodite, he's in Singles, he's in Private Parts, the Howard Stern movie, which is where people really started to know him. He's in Sidney Pollack's Sabrina. He's in his Broadway debut is in Tom Stoppard's Arcadia in 1995, which I saw. I didn't know who Paul Giamatti is.
Oh, wow.
But I think I saw that Broadway production. Tom Stoppard, one of the great playwrights. This play was amazing.
Yeah.
And it's just strange. And he was also in David Hare's Racing Demon, Iceman Cometh. And people are starting to notice this guy. He's in My Best Friend's Wedding, Saving Private Ryan. In Man on the Moon, he plays Bob Zamuda, who does the Tony Clifton thing. Right. So he's starting to, he's in Deconstructing Harry, The Truman Show, Big Mama's House, Planet of the Apes, Big Fat Liar. And then it's really American Splendor, where it's like suddenly, oh, who is this guy? And, and that's the movie that leads to Sideways. And of course, he's also nominated for an Oscar for one of your favorite films, Cinderella Man. He's in The Illusionist. John Adams, his performance is astounding. That's where he wins the Emmy. He's in Saving Mr. Banks. And of course, that, we get him as... We get him as Rhino in Amazing Spider-Man, his role on Billions. And of course, that brings us up to The Holdovers, which he was so spectacular working with Alexander Payne again. And by the way, one other thing I found out, there is a campaign that you all can help with, which is a campaign called Wax Paul Now, where they are trying to raise 500,000 signatures to get Madame Tussauds to make a wax figure of Paul Giamatti. And they're not there yet, but you can find this online and you can sign the petition and you can hope to get Paul Giamatti waxed.
I went in a completely different direction because Paul.
I know you did. I could tell. I could tell.
A hairy guy. I thought maybe they're trying to. Oh, Kelly Clarkson.
Kelly Clarkson.
Yeah, for me, I remember Paul in the Howard Stern film Private Parts as Pig Vomit. That was my first kind of experience with him, and I thought he was really great in that role. But it wasn't like, oh, Paul Giamatti is the one to watch. So I just knew he did a great job in that. And I know he popped up in a small role in Truman Show as the master control operator there with Ed Harris. I remember him and Donnie Brasco. And I can't remember what other character actor is with him, like listening to the tapes and stuff there for the government there. And then I remember him in Saving Private Ryan, of course, with his feet hurting and all of that. But it was Safe Men where I really started to glimpse what he could be. Steve Zahn and is it Steve and Sam Rockwell? I think those are the three of them in that movie. And I was just kind of blown away by what he could do. Because the two main guys are Zahn and Rockwell, and Paul Giamatti, I think, plays like the cousin or the son of the main bad guy in the film, Michael Lerner, who was also the bad guy kind of in Elf. And there's something he does with the character of Veal Chop, and he's constantly wearing these Zubaz pants, which were big back in the 90s, and it just said something about you, kind of like wearing an Ed Hardy shirt. And he kind of stood out for me. So from that moment on, I had kind of been watching Paul Giamatti as a kind of an actor to watch, and to see him progress as he did, role by role, into the point where he was leading this film, I thought was amazing to have someone like him, of his appearance, of his look, of his energy, be the lead in a film. And it speaks volumes, because so many times actors are like, well, I don't look like, Cary Grant, or I don't look like, it's like, it's not about that. It's about how good you are. Do people want to see you? And do you have that thing? And that thing that can't quite be explained. And I think Paul Giamatti has that thing, plus having an incredible amount of talent. So yeah, I mean, he's a gift.
If you have any doubts about this guy, watch this movie, because spoiler alert, Paul Giamatti can act.
Yes,
I mean,
100%.
this guy, every second he's on screen, and he's on screen for almost the entire movie, he is fascinating to watch.
Agreed. And Alexander Payne said this about how Paul Giamatti got the film. He said, once I had auditioned Paul Giamatti in New York City, I had no one else in mind for the part. Even as actors were more well-known than he at the time and were expressing interest, he was the only one I was looking at. One other actor who made a strong impression on me in an audition was Ty Burrell, who would later star in Modern Family. So as you talk about alternate universes, there is an alternate universe where it is Ty Burrell who is the lead of Sideways, possibly goes on to be this massive theatrical film star and gets Oscar nominations and Oscars for his work. So there's another world where Ty Burrell
not knowing anything, I could totally, he makes perfect sense in this movie. And the movie, I think, would probably be funnier. You know, like because Ty Burrell, it would go more in the funny, embarrassing area,
right?
But would he really bring the sadness? You know, that's really the question I have. Maybe Ty has that gear. I've never seen it because I've largely just seen him in Modern Family. You know, where it's not going to get to that kind of a level. You know,
the pathos. And I think you're absolutely right. I think he'd be more suited for the Thomas Haden Church role than he would be for Miles, for the Paul Giamatti role, for sure. But we will never know because it was Paul Giamatti who got cast in the film. And one last thing, Alexander Payne says this because a lot of people interview him and ask him, well, did you see him in American Splendor? Because that had been the year before. And Alexander says, no, I only cast off auditions. I audition people. So everybody auditioned to be in this movie, including his wife at the time, Sandra Oh, who we'll talk about later when we get to Stephanie. All right, so we see that Miles, Steve, you and I, we've lived in and around LA for a long time. He lives in a classic LA apartment complex named the Seacrest, which I think is hilarious. He gets to his red car, and we see that it looks like he parked that thing while he was drunk the night before. Have you ever lived in a place like this? And what do you think of the intro of Miles as we start the movie before he fully utters or has any real big exchange?
What was this apartment complex called? The Sea Breeze or something?
The
Seacrest. Well, I lived in the Colony Surf apartments. so yes, I've lived in multiple places that very much look like this. And it's so funny because I had forgotten it's actually San Diego because my first note was that is a perfect LA apartment building. Yeah. Because they're everywhere in Los Angeles. Yes. And everyone has lived in this kind of a place who's moved to LA. Everybody has.
Yeah, multiple times I've lived in a place like this.
Can I say one more thing though, which is that the choice of his car being a Saab, is perfect. A Saab is so because there's always something, it's like, it could have been a Honda Civic. Yeah. Sure. It could have been an Isuzu. No, it's a Saab because a Saab is just this perfect little bit of pretentiousness to it. It's just that is genius.
I know. I agree. 100%. That's so perfect. I'm so glad you brought that up. I almost bought a Saab one time, and I sat inside of it at a CarMax, and I was like, nah, I don't have this kind of pretentiousness. I don't have this level of pretentiousness.
I know I said I would be there by noon, but there's all of this work going on at my building, and it's just a total nightmare. But I'm on my way. I'm out the door right now.
So that gives us an idea of who this guy is, right? He slept in. He clearly looked like he was driving drunk the night before, and now he's lying to his friend because he totally forgot the roofers were coming that morning and now uses the convenient excuse to get out of the fact that he was late. He also lies and says he is on his way, as we do in LA, and he is out the door right now. But he isn't, because we cut to him in the bathroom pooping and reading with the door open, which I've never done with the door open, showering, flossing, and then stopping off to get coffee and breakfast. And of course, Steve, the New York Times.
Well, and this is key. I think this is central to the story, which is that he says, I'm right on the door. I'm out the door. I'm on my way, which when you say that, what you are supposed to do is at least move quickly. And it is very clear he is in no hurry whatsoever. Yeah. Everything he does is as lackadaisical as possible. And that is perfect contrast to, I'm right out the door. I'm on my way. Perfect. Yeah.
He's got an impish rebelliousness to him that is unearned, but he feels like he deserves to do it at his pace, which I think is something we're going to discover throughout the whole movie. We cut to him getting on the 5 near LAX. He plays the crossword puzzle while he drives, which I think is a great character beat to show how careless yet independent he is in that way.
Yeah. Also, the asshole.
Yes.
You should not, folks out there who are drivers, you shouldn't do a crossword puzzle on your steering wheel while driving on the freeway. That's not safe driving.
It's more dangerous than doing it on your app. It is much more dangerous the way he's doing it, I think, than doing it on your phone, but maybe it's equally as bad. But he gets off on the exit to Brentwood, which we would know as Brentwood. A graphic tells us this is Los Angeles, California. He pulls in the driveway of this wealthy-looking house next to a bunch of other cars in the driveway. He rings the doorbell and is led in by Mrs. Erganian, who is played by Sheikh Tukmanyan,
who happens to be an extremely well-known Armenian stage actress.
Oh, wow. That's great. Well, she's very polite and seems happy to see him. And we walk through a very expensive house with marble floors as we hear a TV on in the background.
Look what the cat dragged.
Hi, everybody.
Sorry. Somebody finally arrived.
This is Jack, played by Thomas Haden Church,
who's born in 1960 in Yolo, California, did all sorts of voiceover and radio after he moved to Texas as a young man, then moved to LA, started to do independent films, got a gig on a little TV show called Cheers, which is what led to him getting Wings, which it sounds like you watched Wings. I watched Wings back in the day.
Yeah.
And he's done all sorts of TV. He's done Tombstone. He was in George of the Jungle. After Sideways, he did Idiocracy, and then tons of voiceover work in addition to doing Broken Trail, the Larry McMurtry with Robert Duvall. And of course, he is Sandman in Spider-Man.
Right.
And I owe Thomas Haden Church an apology.
Wow.
And here is why. I fell into one of the classic blunders of believing that he was like the characters that he played in movies. And as I was texting you while I was doing it, I just listened to the commentary track for Sideways, which is just him and Paul Giamatti. And while I will stand by the fact that as a treasure trove of material for the Cine-Files, it did not quite live up to expectations. But they charmed me so much, these two guys. And Thomas Haden Church is like a genius. Yeah. He is so brilliant. He is super articulate, unbelievably well-read, extremely knowledgeable, and I just sort of bought him so much in this movie that I thought he was like that, which he totally isn't.
Yeah, no, not at all. And he's an amazing guy. And I love the fact that we have Sandman and Rhino, two Spider-Man villains here coming together as a twosome, of course, with two different Spider-Men in their respective franchises, but really funny to see them coming together. Some background here on Thomas Haden Church getting cast in this. During his audition, he stripped naked because that was what the scene called for. And he later learned that he was the only actor to do that, which might have helped him get the role. He was a finalist for a role in About Schmidt in 2002, which kept him on the mind of Alexander Payne. He says he likes people who audition and do really well, and he's always trying to figure out what role he can cast them in, even if they're not right for the role they're auditioning for, which I thought was really great. And another person who was looked at for this role was George Clooney. Clooney, this is the early 2000s, campaigned really hard for the part of Jack, but Alexander Payne thought Clooney was way too big of a star to play it. But he did get to play the lead, of course, in The Descendants in 2011. Like I said, he likes to make mental notes of actors and then use them later on in roles that make much more sense for him. So this is a whole different movie. This is Ty Burrell and George Clooney. Right?
He's always been a character actor in a movie star body. Like he really likes, I just rewatched Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I'm not going to say exactly why I did that, but he is totally, he loves doing that. He loves going to the character store and coming up with an interesting character.
There's a lot of Cary Grant in George Clooney, not just the looks, but the willingness to go there in crazy situations. Go watch Arsenic and Old Lace, everybody, and you'll see Cary Grant in a completely different light when you see him in that movie and the madness that he's willing to put himself through in that film.
Jack tells us you are publishing a book. Congratulations.
Yes, congratulations.
Yes, well, it's not exactly finalized yet, so there has been some interest.
Your friend is modest.
They all think he is being modest. They ask if it's nonfiction, and Miles says it's a novel, but that some of it is taken from his own life, so it has nonfiction parts to it, which causes Mike Erganian, Christine's father, to reply,
Good.
I like nonfiction. There's so much to know about this world. I think you read something somebody just invented it. Waste of time.
Which elicits a interesting response from Miles, who says,
It's an interesting perspective.
so Steve, have you ever had interactions with anybody who is like asking if you're writing nonfiction or fiction, or doesn't maybe understand the approach to both of these and has an opinion like this?
Well, we got to. There's a 1-2 punch here that I think is really important, and that is number 2. And I want to get to number 2, but number 1 is that there is a fundamental difference in how you interact in the world between Jack and Miles.
Yes,
Jack is always putting out the most positive story, even when, or sometimes particularly when, that story is a lie.
Yeah,
is that he's the salesman, so he's saying the books are about to be published. That is the most totally positive interpretation of the reality that is beyond real that he is going to do. And I'm sure with his career, I booked this gig. I have this thing. I'm sure he's always done. And Miles is the opposite. And believe me, I am a Miles, because I have learned, and this leads into your next question, which is that when I was young, and I was first having meetings, and I'd say, oh, I had a meeting at Sony. Oh, I had a meeting at Disney. Oh, I had a this. And I would tell my family, and they would tell all the extended family and friends. And then you get all the people asking, hey, what's going on with your Sony thing, with your Disney thing? And when, of course, none of them ever happen, then it just becomes a brutal, painful experience. And so you learn to shut the fuck up, which is what Miles has learned. And what Jack has done is essentially put him in this situation where now he has to talk about the thing in a way he doesn't want to talk about, leading to your next question. The answer is yes, all the time. That is when people who are not in the industry or just family, friends, and parents of people you meet, and they go, oh, you do this. And you say, yeah, I'm writing an action story. And they go, oh, yes, I don't like action. You know what you should do. And then they tell you what you should do. Yes. I mean, this happens constantly. And the one that I always love, and I'll shut up about it, but a little bit of a rant, is people, if you have a writer friend and you think that their problem is they don't have a good idea, you do not understand your writer friend. No, writers are not going around like, oh man, I could easily win an Oscar if only some person at a cocktail party would come up and tell me about their Aunt Sadie that I should write a script about. Happens all the time. You know what you should really do? I know here's a great story for you. It's like, yeah, that's my problem. I can't come up with any ideas. Thanks a lot, Uncle Jim.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I hear you. I definitely have a little bit of the Miles in me, and I vacillate between both of these guys depending on what I'm getting or what I'm talking about for sure. We cut to Miles and Jack now backing out of the driveway. So clearly these are the two guys who are going to be hanging out and be our main leads in the movie. By the way, just a quick tidbit. This house that we were at is located directly opposite O.J. Simpson's famous house there in North Rockingham at the time of the murder of his ex-wife Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman. So they legitimately shot this in Brentwood, man. So kind of interesting.
And this is the area which, right as we speak, is under threat of fires.
Yes,
this is exactly where the Palisades fire is encroaching on, is those Brentwood Hills.
Sadly so. Yeah, two of Lindley's family members have had to evacuate their houses because of the recent turn in the fires, for sure. Such a shame, man. After Jack waves goodbye for an appropriate amount of time, he turns to Miles and immediately gives him shit for being late.
Where the fuck were you, man? Huh? I was dying in there. We're supposed to be 100 miles away by now.
I can't help the traffic.
Oh, come on. You're fucking hungover. You know you are.
Jack is also, as much as you say he's positive, Jack is also very much kind of a child who only does things because he has to do things, not because he wants to do things. And him being mad at Miles for being late, for leaving him there with his family, with his wife's or his future wife's family, is clearly something he is not happy about here. So,
okay, there was a tasting last night, yes. But I wanted to get us something nice for the ride up. Check out the box.
So now, Steve, not only is he doing crosswords on the highway, he has now brought wine into the equation for them to drink while they're driving on their wine trip here.
Yeah, I there's a lot of irresponsible traffic choices here. And I agree with you. So his intention was that they were going to drink on the road.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. Wow.
Why did you tell them that my novel was being published?
Because you said you had it all lined up.
No, I didn't. No. What I said was that there was some interest at Conundrum.
Yeah, Conundrum.
Right, and that one of the editors was passing it up to a senior editor.
Sounds pretty good to me.
But Miles utters what most frustrated artists have uttered more than once in their careers in order to deal with the rejection.
I'm not going to get my hopes up. You know, I've stopped caring. The hell with it. I have stopped caring.
Steve, how many times have you uttered this phrase mentally, if not out loud, in your mind?
This week? Yeah, all the time. I mean, this is the roller coaster you're on. You know, is you have to care to write the novel. I mean, you have to really, really care. This is a long book that Miles wrote, and then you have to try to pretend that you can turn off that caring as you go.
It's two boxes of a novel, as we find out in the movie.
Yeah.
Jack then proceeds to open the 1992 Byron Brut Reserve Pinot Noir from the box, much to Miles's horror, and drinks it out of a cheap wine glass. And Steve, Miles delivers the first of many lessons he will deliver to Jack about wine in this movie.
That's 100% Pinot Noir, single vineyard. They don't even make it anymore.
Pinot Noir?
Mm-hmm.
How come it's white?
And here comes the pretentiousness. This is the line of the scene, Steve. He says,
Oh, Jesus. Don't ask questions like that up in wine country. They'll think you're some kind of dumb shit, okay?
So we just had a scene where Jack said, hey, your book's being published. You know, that's definitely, you could see the contrast in styles there. And now we get the next one, is that Miles has these snobby standards that really bother me.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you mentioned at the beginning of this that I'm a foodie, and it's true. I am as much a foodie as I think Miles is a wino.
Right.
But I really, really hope that I am not this kind of snob.
No.
This moment is all about him. Oh, don't embarrass me in front of the wine people, rather than I want you to have a great time at this wine tasting with me, you know?
Right. But I will say this, Steve. I'll ask you two questions. One, is this you in the early days of your film snobbery?
Yes.
Is this
100%?
you?
Yes, you're 100%. That is exactly what I did. Just like, because I just was so wanted to, and this is that it comes out of insecurity, it comes out of Miles wants to feel special, and this is what makes him special, you know?
And this is my second question to you. Do you think at this point, and rewatching the film, obviously, I watched the film 3 times to prepare because I really, really enjoyed this movie. Do you think that there is an undercurrent of jealousy from Miles towards Jack, and it comes out in these moments, in these passive-aggressive shots he takes at Jack, because Jack is about to marry into a wealthy family, and as we find out later, Jack has got a job already lined up with his wife's dad, which could pay him even more money. He's got a beautiful young wife he's about to marry. And here is Miles, 2 years removed from a divorce, still in love with the woman who divorced him, not being able to sell a novel, as we find out in the film, and then just feeling like he's living and drinking and driving late at night and what have you. So do you think this is his way to try to stay above Jack in some way? Do you think this is born out of arrogance?
100% yes. It is born out of insecurity. That's exactly what I think that he has. I have this thing over you, and I'm going to hold it over you. And what I think is what's so great about this movie, and it's what I said at the beginning, it goes both ways.
Yes.
Is that
100%.
there are things that that Jack, there are all sorts of things that he knows he's not Miles, you know? Right. He knows that he's shallow. He knows that, and when we see the big breakdown, obviously much later in the film, I think there's a lot of that's like, you know, Jack knows who he is on some level, and in that he's full of shit. And so he is jealous of Miles, Miles is all sorts of things, but he is not full of shit in the way that Jack is full of shit. You know,
right.
He's full of shit in his own ways.
Yes, exactly. In different ways. Well, as they continue driving, Miles asks Jack about the new edits in his book and the new ending, and Jack proceeds to lie about liking the changes and loving the new ending, and to which Miles calls him out for not reading them because there is no new ending.
Well, maybe it just seemed new because everything leading up to it was so different.
Yeah, that must be it.
Steve, how many people have lied to you that they've read your drafts of plays or stories and you've realized that they're lying to you?
It honestly hasn't happened very much. It's much more likely that they just have never read it a year later, even though they're not lying to me. They're just not reading it. There's so many things about this scene that are great. One is, the first thing is, this is a 750-page book.
Yeah.
You don't ask your friend to read your 750-page book twice.
Especially a friend you just called possible dumb shit. So yeah,
I mean, it's just that is just so ridiculous. I have my friend Dave, who is the most prolific writer I know, could write a screenplay in a weekend and has. Dave sent me his 1,000-page science fiction epic.
Yeah.
And I did read it. But if he had asked me to read it again, I wouldn't have. You know, like it was, and Dave's a good writer, but it's like that is a huge time commitment to read 750 pages. That's the first thing. My question for you is, did Jack ever read the whole thing?
No.
I don't think so either.
I was going to ask you the same thing. No, there's no way he has read that 750-page book. Now, the kid doesn't look like he could
he skimmed,
read a 20-page
he looked
book.
at a few pages.
Yeah. If it was an
page
EW,
through it.
Yeah, exactly. Miles would have done better noting the page and the paragraph of the changes than having him read the whole book, which speaks to an interesting situation. Why would Miles give him the book to read, for God's sakes? And is this his only friend other than his wife? Like, is he the kind of guy who only had like one friend or two friends and then married his wife and made her his friend, or made her his friend? So he only really had two friends. So now he doesn't have her, so he only has Miles. So he kind of puts all the stuff on Jack, rather, as his friend.
Dude, I cannot begin to tell you how important the criticalness, the desperation you could feel about having anybody read the fucking thing you wrote.
Yeah.
Like, I can't begin to tell, because so 750 pages, that is so many, that's years of Miles's life.
Yeah.
Where he was sitting alone in a room and just doing this thing, and nobody knows about the thing except him. It's just him, and that's it. And now you have these 750 pages. The desperation to be seen, to have someone appreciate that work, to someone that's the whole reason you do it, is for somebody to read the book, you know.
Right.
And like the most, and this is part of why I'm not really in the film industry anymore, and it's part of the pain of the script that is never going to be seen.
Yeah.
Like those ones I was talking about with Alexander Payne. There's all these projects, and like it's literally, and there's a line later in the movie where he says, I guess I'll just, chalk up 3 more years of my life.
Yeah.
Like, I can't tell you how many times, like the last one for me is Malibu Buzz, which is the thing I wrote for Jane Seymour, which had this moment that she was really excited about the project. And I think it's a really, really tight script. 15 people have read it. All of them said they really thought it was great.
Yeah.
And that's it. And now it's just sitting in a file on my computer, and that's where it will live, and it will never happen. And that is so sad to me.
Wow. Yeah, I can't even imagine that. Because that doesn't happen for actors. Actors don't like perform great monologues, record themselves, and no one ever sees it. It's just not the same kind of thing, So yeah, it's a tough situation.
I think we talked about it before, but to me, it's the depth. It's frequent disappointments versus deep disappointments.
Yeah,
it's like an actor. If they're auditioning, doing one audition a week, and they don't book anything, that's 50 disappointments in the year.
Yeah.
But they were just like a day or two of work. They weren't, none of them were things, they weren't their life's blood. It wasn't King Lear, probably. Yeah. Whereas for the writer, you might only have 1 or 2 of those disappointments, but it was 6 months of work.
Yeah.
Or more. That's the difference.
Well, they pull off the highway and they head to Oxnard. Much to Jack's surprise, Miles wants to say a, quote, quick hello to his mother, as it's her birthday this weekend. Who plans a bachelor party weekend, in essence, was what this is, on the same weekend as their mother's birthday. But oh well. Miles has no idea how old she's going to be either when they turn up, and he fills out his mother's birthday card as he is walking up to the door with flowers. Steve, this is not a well-prepared guy or a remotely considerate guy, at least from this window into his behavior.
You don't spring the side trips. There's just so many, like, don't do the crossword puzzle while you're driving. Don't drink while you're driving. Don't out your friend about the book that's not actually going to be published. Don't open the wine when you don't want to. Yeah. Don't lie about reading the book. And don't spring a visit to mom on your bachelor party week. Like, none of these things are what you're supposed to do, folks.
Oh, so bad. And writing the card as you're walking up to your mother's house. Jesus. And some of you probably listening to us who've done this. Don't do this. You take a little bit of time, for God's sakes. Well, they surprise Miles' mom, played by Mary Louise Burke, in her red dressing gown.
Happy birthday, Mom.
Oh my God, Miles and Jack. What a surprise.
She's fantastic. She's done tons and tons of theater, Broadway, off-Broadway. She had the title role in Kimberly Akimbo off-Broadway, which got her a Drama Desk Award and Obie. She was in films like Meet Joe Black, Bringing Out the Dead. She's in Ozark, Sleepwalk with Me. She is a fantastic character actor, and I think she just totally steals the show for the next couple of scenes.
Oh, yeah. She is so happy to get the flowers. And because she's so happy, Jack responds that they're from both of us, giving us a window into the inauthentic and opportunistic dude Jack actually is. This elicits a response from Miles's mother, however, when she says,
A famous actor bringing me flowers on my birthday. Don't I feel special?
and she means it. And now we know, Steve, that Jack is an actor who must have been in some things that Miles's mother has seen.
I think she watched that soap opera.
Oh, yeah.
Doctor whatever it was. She seems like she was a soap opera fan.
Famous actor's getting married next week, Mom, right?
Oh, that's right. Oh, isn't that nice? I hope that girl knows how lucky she is, marrying no less than Derek Summersby.
Gosh, that was like 11 years ago, Mrs. Raymond.
Clearly embarrassed to be reminded of how long ago it was. Now, let me tell you, as an actor, this is something that is rough to experience. And of course, I didn't book anything to the levels that Thomas Haden Church's character does in this movie. But people ask you all the time, "Hey, I thought weren't you in Transformers? How come you don't do more Transformers episodes? Or weren't you in this movie? How come you don't do more of this? Or I saw you in this. Why didn't you do more of this?" And when people bring up old stuff, even nowadays, when people bring up The Outlaw, it feels like so long ago, and it has been like 7 years since I even put that on, or 5 years, whatever. It's been a long time, and so it's just a weird thing to hear people talk about it, and it always makes you uncomfortable because you haven't.
People are so dumb. John, why don't you do more of those Transformer voiceovers? It's like,
great idea.
Through that question. Oh my God, it never occurred to that to me is up there with, hey, here's an idea for you to write a screenplay about.
Exactly.
It's like, thanks. Thanks. That's just what I needed.
Oh, now, Miles, why didn't you tell me you were coming and bringing this handsome man? Look how I'm dressed. I've got to run and put my face on.
You look fabulous, Mrs. Raymond.
Oh, stop it.
Meanwhile, Steve, I don't know if you noticed it this time, Miles has reverted to a body position on the couch that I feel like he sat in when he was a teenager in that same house, right?
Yeah.
Slightly laid back with his hands clasped behind his head, watching a History Channel documentary about World War II and Hitler that his mom was watching when they came through the door, and then Jack sits next to him.
First of all, as far as the location is concerned, every location in this movie is kind of amazing.
Yes.
And they're amazing because they feel 100% from the San Diego apartment, to the house in Brentwood, to this house in Oxnard, to all the other places we're going to go. They are authentically 100% California. I've been in every single one of these places. They feel totally real and not in a movie sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I was really blown away by that. And the performance here from Mrs. Raymond is so perfect because all of us who've been in the performing arts, if you have a friend's mother or our own mother who is like so supportive or loving us, like they are constantly just wowed by the things we did in the past. And it's from a sweet place, but they just don't get the business at all or the industry at all. But it's always nice to hear or be remembered, for God's sake. So,
yeah.
She yells out asking if they're hungry, and Miles says yes, which draws a look of consternation from Jack because Miles says, just a quick snack. But Jack clearly wants out of there, Steve, and he's been bamboozled by Miles, who said this was only going to be a quick stop.
Well, this is what I mean about they're both so irritating. Yes. Like, what is in the reality, we're going to get to what the actual reality is, which is that Miles it has to be longer than a quick stop because he's got to rob his mom. That's actually why he's here. I don't think if he didn't want to come get the money, do you think that he would have brought flowers to mom on her birthday?
No,
I don't think so either.
No, not at all. Which is horrible to think about. But we cut to them later with a full spread out on the outside patio with plates, bowls of food. Mrs. Raymond now appears with her makeup on in a flowery dress.
This is delicious, Mrs. Raymond. Absolutely delicious.
They're just leftovers.
Is this chicken?
I could have made something fancier if a certain someone had let me know that a certain someone was coming for a visit and bringing a certain special friend.
It was a surprise.
So at this point, Steve, you have to ask if she's had a crush on Jack, maybe since they were, because we find out that they got to know each other as college roommates in San Diego State. Do you think she's had a thing for him the whole time?
Wow, I never had that thought.
Okay.
It's certainly possible. I'm sure, he's good looking, charming, I'm sure super good looking and when he was in college, and then he was this actor, had this famous thing 11 years ago. So I think that's totally true. What I was interpreting it was more, my son is so negative and sad and depressed, and this guy is so positive about everything. Yeah. Maybe he's going to run off on Miles. Maybe this will rub off on Miles.
Oh, interesting.
That's how I always kind of saw it.
All right, I've got more points to defend my position on. Let's keep.
I'm not arguing against your position. It never occurred to me before.
Yeah. No, I said to promote my position, not to defend. Sorry. She tells them that she could have put the nice sheets on the guest bed and pull out, and that Wendy, I'm assuming this is Miles' sister, and the kids are coming tomorrow to take them all out to brunch. So now this has become a whole new production for her birthday. This is all news to Miles and Jack. She clearly was ready to do a whole brunch thing and set a whole thing up behind Miles's back while he was there, and didn't even ask him if he'd want to go to brunch the next day with her and the family.
Doesn't your mom want to arrange to have brunch or something the next day and have more time with you?
Sure, but she usually tells me.
Well, when you usually probably don't show up unexpectedly.
That's 100% the truth. That's 100% the truth.
One thing, by the way, but two things about this meal. One, it was super cold when they were shooting it. It was so cold that they all had to have ice cubes in their mouth while they were shooting this scene, eating the meal. Wow. Because that's what keeps your breath from steaming when it's really, really cold, is you have to reduce the temperature of your mouth so that the air doesn't come out hot and steam. So that's how cold it was. But that wasn't really the toughest thing about this meal. They all got food poisoning. It was really bad. They were all really laid up from something they ate at this meal.
Jesus, yikes. Oh, so we cut to Miles going into the house, up the stairs and into his mother's bedroom. And he proceeds to search and find his mother's bottle of Ajax, which is full of money that she has hidden in her drawer, as Steve said. And he essentially robs money from his own mother. And that is what you're doing. Some people think, he's borrowing. It's his mom. No, he is robbing money from his mother because he didn't tell her that he's taking the money. It's insane.
Yeah. So Paul Giamatti thinks that he believes that the character of his mother knew that he was stealing from her, and that this was a thing that had happened before, and that's what Paul Giamatti says.
Wow,
yeah,
that's an interesting rationalization. Well, he closes the drawer, but as he does, he stops and looks at the pictures of his childhood, his parents, and his marriage, which we get the first hint of here, and he looks like such a sad sack. And as Steve mentioned here, his actual father is in that picture with him, Bart Giamatti. So there's probably a lot in this shot, not only for the character, but also for Paul Giamatti here, that I think really works and is a shame to see on his face and to see what he's been reduced to, because I think this is also a moment of self-awareness, kind of like the addict who kind of realizes that he or she is in that moment of awareness of how bad their situation is.
Yeah, that's what I feel too.
Yeah. Well, Miles walks back outside as Mrs. Raymond is continuing to fangirl over Jack, asking about his spray and wash commercial. Jack says he only remembers the girl who was in the commercial with him, which is a window into his obsession with women. But Mrs. Raymond says she only remembers him jogging in that commercial. And I wrote here, okay, now it's getting a little creepy. So I think she does have a thing for him.
I totally think she thinks he's attractive, 100%.
Yeah,
I just don't. I don't think there's a intent to act on it, I guess is what I think. But you clearly you've got more evidence to present. I'm looking forward to it.
Jack tells us later, which we'll get to. But so Miles reminds her again that Jack's wedding is next Saturday after she asks about it, and then Mrs. Raymond responds by asking Miles,
when are you going to get married again?
I just got divorced, Phyllis.
He uses her proper name, Steve, after calling her mom this whole time. That's got to mean something.
Totally. I think that's exactly, these are the relationships we have with our family who poke you. So she fawns over Jack this whole time and then pokes him for not getting married. When are you going to get married again?
2 years ago, buddy.
You should get back together with Victoria. She was good for you. She was good for you. And so beautiful and so intelligent. You know her, right?
Oh, yeah, real well. Still do.
I'm worried about you, Miles. You need some money.
And so ends Saturday. And I write here, woof. Steve, this is really a complex relationship between him and his mom. You can understand why he's such a sad sack, because it seems like he's so codependent with his mother. And who knows how long his father was in the equation with all of this. But there is some real deep-seated stuff. And what you just said, I had never thought about. So now I'm kind of thinking about it in my mind. She fawns all over Jack. She does not fawn all over Miles. She calls out Miles, not necessarily in a mean way. She thinks she's coming from a good place, but she doesn't ask him about the novel. She doesn't ask him when it's getting public. What she asks him about is, when are you getting married again? And why don't you just get remarried to the woman you just got divorced from? Because she was good for you, meaning that there was flaws in Miles that she helped to deal with. So yeah, not a lot of positive thing coming out of the situation, even though she seems like a really sweet lady.
I think you can frame these things, the exact same actions, in two ways. One is she is disappointed in Miles. She is poking at Miles. She is, like, there was something wrong with you that Victoria made better. And the other is she's genuinely worried about her son, who's clearly depressed and clearly not moving on and clearly having a really, really tough time. Yeah. And how do you, what do you do? Oh, well, she goes like, hey, look how great Jack is. Jack's doing great. Can't you be more like Jack? Or Victoria, when you were with Victoria, you weren't this horrible sad sack. So maybe like you, and the fact is, when someone, isn't going out and isn't, and is really depressed, and then that is a thing that moms are going to do something, have feelings about,
I think you never stop wanting to take care of your child. If you're a good parent, you never stop wanting to take care of your child or help your child. I think that's the truth. But I think parents sometimes forget that children become adults, and they're the constant, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that, regresses some people back to a time that they're not in anymore. And so it can be more detrimental than it is helpful. So it all depends on how you adjust your conversation with your child when they become an adult, and so, because you yourself as a parent don't like people telling you what to do. Why do you think your child would like you to tell them what to do, who is now an adult? So it's always a thin line that you walk with that kind of stuff. Which I'm sure you're going to discover in a few years. Yourself.
I'm already walking it, and he's not an adult.
I don't envy where you're going. All right, Steve, we get a graphic that reads Sunday. So now we're up to Sunday. They have stayed the night, and Miles is waking Jack up from the guest bed. They walk down the stairs, and we see that Phyllis has fallen asleep on the couch with her body all akimbo. Jack tries to turn off the TV, and Miles stops him because she'll wake up. And the camera moves us to the flowers, which are still in their plastic and not in any water or vase. So what an ending to this time together, Steve. He doesn't even want to wake his mother up. Not because he doesn't want to bother her. It's because he probably doesn't want to spend any more time there, and he's not going to brunch.
Yeah, there's just so many no-nos on this trip. You're going on it's not exactly a bachelor party, but it's the bachelor weekend.
Yeah, kind of.
And you go to your mom's house. Well, even that was not called for on this trip. Then you end up spending a meal, which you weren't supposed to do. And now you make the bachelor spend the night on your mom's couch at her house in Oxnard on night one of this.
Mom's guest bed. She slept on the couch.
Bed.
She was on the
guest bed. Whatever. It's not cool. This was not a cool move on Miles's part.
Yeah. But I think the camera moving to the flowers, this is obviously on purpose to show how little she really cared about those flowers. So it's an interesting commentary on their relationship, I think, as well. We got to a diner as a young, pretty blonde waitress brings them their breakfast. Jack makes eyes at her and comments on her attractiveness. Miles pushes back, saying,
For God's sake, as if she would even be attracted to guys like us in the first place.
Speak for yourself, man. I get chicks looking at me all the time, all ages.
I'm assuming Miles's mom.
Dudes, too.
Well, it's not worth it. You pay too big a price. It's never free.
As you watch the movie, you find out that Miles cheated on his wife, which led to the divorce. But here he is telling Jack not to do it, not to cheat on his fiancée, which he's about to do multiple times on the trip. So is Miles coming from a place of legitimate care for Jack or experience? What do you think he's coming from when he tells him not to indulge in it? It's too big of a price.
Yes, I think those are both true. I think he does genuinely, I think he does care about Jack, and he does see that, it's like, I always kind of go to like, well, how many chess moves do people see in advance?
Yeah.
And Jack sees very few chess moves in advance. He's really only sees the move that he's on. And because let's be real clear, Miles saying that it's never free is 100% right in this movie. The choices that Jack is going to make are going to cost him and almost cost him everything, his upcoming marriage and everything else, so Miles is correct on this, but Miles is also, because what else is this scene about, which we're going to get into is Jack saying Miles needs to get laid, is Miles is not putting himself out there at all because the price of everything is too high.
And I think Miles is also coming from a place of like, I have just experienced the price you're going to pay. If you lose it, it's almost too big of a price if you indulge in it. So interesting places to come from. Jack tells Miles that he needs to get laid, as Steve is referencing here. The super sensitive guy's response to everything, I'm sure. He says he's going to get him laid as a best man present instead of actually spending money on a gift. I guess that's a good thing. Miles said he'd rather have a knife.
I think it depends on how this all goes down. This
is a cheap way out. This is a cheap actor's way out. I'm going to get you laid instead of spending any money on you. And I love Miles says, I'd rather have the knife.
Yeah, it's more dependable. I mean, you keep use a good knife for years.
You have been officially depressed for like 2 years now. And you're a negative guy anyway, even back in college. And now it's worse. You're wasting away. Teaching English to fucking 8th graders when they ought to be reading what you wrote. Your books, Miles.
I'm working on it.
I think in some way he's trying to be positive with Miles in a way it's like tough love in some weird, messed up way. Because Jack actually thinks this is the way out for Miles to get laid, Miles to be with other women. And maybe Miles has only ever been with Victoria and no one else because clearly he's known him since college. And I wonder if Jack thinks this is the reason, legitimately thinks this is the reason Miles is still attracted to Victoria, still wanting her back, and he needs to break that chain in order to move on.
Jack thinks that getting laid is the solution to his problems.
He's a great psychiatrist, that Jack, yeah.
I mean, it's very clear to him that that's going to solve everything. So why wouldn't it solve things for Miles? Another thing is, is anything that Jack said about Miles wrong? Not really.
I don't think so. Yeah.
I think it might be brutally honest, but it does seem he is a guy who's been depressed for 2 years and he was already a really negative guy all the way back to college. I think Miles was a negative 8-year-old.
I think Miles was a negative baby. Let's go all the way back. But I think it's different too. I want to make it clear, like, you can be happy teaching English to 8th graders, but you can tell Miles is not.
Actually, you can't. It's not possible. You can't. I'm kidding. Wonderful teachers out there and wonderful 8th graders.
Exactly. But I think Miles is not happy, which is what Jack is tapping into. He knows Miles is not happy teaching 8th grade. It's not what he wants to be doing with his life. So he's trying in some messed up way to motivate him.
Are you still seeing that shrink?
I saw him on Monday. I spent most of the time helping him with his computer.
Well, I say, fuck therapy. And what is that stuff you take, Xanax?
And Lexapro, yes.
Well, I say fuck that too. You need to get your joint worked on, Miles.
I don't think okay.
You're having a major reaction to this. I don't know what it is. What is the
I've
reaction?
heard it my whole life from other dudes. And I will say this. Just getting laid doesn't solve a goddamn thing. It just it's no different than watching a good movie or having a great meal or having a great bottle of wine. It's a temporary distraction from your state of existence. But once it's over, it's over. And so you're just like, well, what do I do next? It doesn't all of a sudden wake up a whole new existence in your life. And Only really unaware guys recommend that kind of stuff because it's not actually the truth because it doesn't get to the core of why he is unhappy. He's not unhappy because he ain't getting fucked. He's unhappy because he hasn't dealt with his issues since his birth. And until he deals with his issues, he's not going to find joy or happiness in his life, no matter how many people he has sex with, you know?
Can I tell you, and I don't know if I'll put this in, but the sage advice I received the evening after I lost my virginity.
Oh my, yes.
So I had sex for the first time in a lovely afternoon in May, and I went to a party that night, and there my good friend Jeff Johnson, who was far more experienced than I was, said, you know, he was the first person I told. I was like, I had sex with Christine last night. He said, how was it? And I said, it was okay. And he said, listen, here's the thing you need to know about sex. Sex is a nice way to spend an afternoon. It's better than a movie. It's better than video games, but don't blow it up to being the be-all and end-all of everything. It's a really nice way to spend an afternoon. Don't take it too seriously. And I went, this is some pretty damn good advice from 17-year-old Jeff Johnson at the time, you know?
That makes sense, all the sense in the world. You know?
This week is not about me. It is about you. I'm going to show you a good time. We're going to drink a lot of good wine. We're going to play some golf. We're going to eat some great food and enjoy the scenery. And we're going to send you off in style, Wolfram.
And get your bones smooched.
So these are two different types of existence, Steve. And we're getting very clear picture of their relationship, who Jack is, who Miles is, and how they approach the world. So it begs the question, how the hell are these two guys friends?
I asked myself this the entire time, but at the end, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
At the end of the movie, does it make sense to you?
It does, because they do love each other. And I think they got to know each other before all of life happened. So there's a foundational understanding, kind of like we saw in Good Will Hunting, right? When Robin Williams says to Skarsgård there, he says, I knew you when you didn't know which side of the bed to piss on, and when you were a pimply-faced teenager. So I knew you before all the big stuff. So I know you, right? And so there is a connective tissue with all of that. And, you know, I've experienced that a few times in my life, especially with like Maurice and Vogel. Like, people get real nervous around Maurice and Michael. And I'm like, these are my two boys. Like, I don't give a shit. But people get I've seen people stutter talking to Maurice, like young people who are trying to be reporters when he was a reporter. And then around Michael, I see young creatives sometimes come and talk to him or try like, hey, can you pass my stuff? Like, they get so nervous. And I'm like, it's fucking Vogel, right? And so there's just a thing when you know someone at a certain stage before they become what they become, all of that stuff gets turned off, especially if the person is like appreciative of the friendship, which Mike and Maurice most often are. So like, that's what I look at when I look at this. They knew each other before everything happened in their adult lives. So there's always that semblance of care. And who knows how many nights they were like sounding boards for each other navigating college, you know, and that there's value in that. You know?
I think this movie does a spectacular job of making you really frustrated with both of them over and over again, question their relationship consistently through the whole thing, going, oh my God, why are you with this guy in both directions? And yet managing to make it totally make sense why they stay together through this entire film.
Yeah, you actually almost appreciate the friendship by the end of the movie.
Totally.
Great point, Steve. Oh, well, they're back on the road and take the next exit for Santa Rosa Road and hit Sanford first. Miles tells us that this place makes top-notch Pinot and Chardonnay, one of the best producers in Santa Barbara. When Jack says he thought Miles didn't like Chardonnay, Miles tells him in that pretentious way,
No, I like all varietals. I just don't generally like the way they manipulate Chardonnay in California. Too much oak and secondary malolactic fermentation.
I had no idea what malolactic fermentation was, and so one of my chores in doing this was to look up the terms and all these things. So malolactic fermentation is a bacterial process that converts malic acid in wine into lactic acid and carbon dioxide. It's a secondary fermentation that's typically performed after the primary fermentation, but can sometimes occur simultaneously. It reduces acidity, improves quality, adds flavor, and it is essential for stabilizing red wines microbiologically.
Okay. Thank you. That's great. What's so funny? Because I'm not a wine person. I'm really, I have a very good palate for food.
Yeah.
And I like cocktails, but wine has never done it for me. So I've never gone to, I've done one, maybe two wine tastings my entire life.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I used to go wine tasting all the time in my previous relationship, and it was a lot of fun. But I always loved discovering the wines. This is something I gravitated to, especially at Trader Joe's. There was the one by the farmers market back when I lived in that area. I would just walk over when they had tastings because it was one of those Trader Joe's where they had the tastings, and I would just sit there for an hour with the person talking, and they would open new bottles for me and stuff like on the side, and it was so much fun to discover wine and enjoy wine in that way, But now I don't do that anymore. But who knows? After this movie, I might open the door again. So we cut to Miles and Jack. Speaking of a tasting, they're at a tasting, and Miles is showing Jack how to savor and appreciate wine. Now, what are your thoughts on this scene here, Steve? Because he's like, he holds the glass up. You got to examine the wine against the light. You're looking for color and clarity. Is it thick, thin, water, syrupy? Now you have to tip it. What you're doing here is checking the color density as it thins out towards the rim. That's going to tell you how old it is. And you stick your nose in it, get your nose in there, smell the flavors. And we hear them talk about what they smell, strawberries, but not the cheese. And then he tells him to put his glass down so he gets some air in it, oxygenating it up. It unlocks the aromas, the flavors. Very important. And when do we drink it? Because that's all Jack wants to do. And he says, now. So what do you think of this back and forth they have and of Miles describing how to do all of this and Jack just kind of going along with it until they finally actually can drink it?
So again, I'm not a wine person. And so I think processes like this are totally interesting. I don't quite understand it because it's not a thing that I really do. But like on the one hand, going through all those steps and really learning to appreciate, but Jack signed up to do this trip. And so, learning about this from Miles is part of what this is about. It always is sort of there's this place where it feels very exclusive and snobby and all those kinds of things that I don't like, but I'm fascinated by anybody who is fascinated by a thing and loves a thing. And Miles genuinely loves this thing.
Well, I imagine this would be a way, because I think there's a little bit of snobbery here, but I don't think it's as predominant as it was earlier in the movie. I think this is legitimately Miles like explaining this whole thing to Jack. And I wonder if this is probably how you might explain this to a person as you were cooking a meal. Like, this is what you do with the meat, and with the meat, you got to let it sit in a certain way. You got to baste it this, you got to do this, you got to do that. And then you got to make sure you let this cook for a little while, and then you put this in. And so I imagine that is a kind of correlative to how you would show a young cook who might be getting into food how to make a meal that that would get the ultimate flavor out of what they were making, I would imagine, right?
Well, but this is what's different, I would say, because what you just described is someone who wants to learn how to cook.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I see. Jack does it. Right.
Right. Is that if I was coming over, like I've cooked you a meal.
You have. It was great. Yes.
Thank you. And it's like I might work really, really hard to cook someone a meal. I put a lot of thought and effort and really work on it. But when I put the food in front of you, I'm not going to tell you what I did. I just want you to enjoy the meal. Like I wouldn't, you know what I mean? Like, and however you want to enjoy the meal, like that's great. Like I would never put a thing on it. You know, if you came to me and said, Steve, how did you cook this thing? Well, yeah, sure. I would be happily teach you what I did to get to the thing. Right. But that's not what's happening here. But again, the wine tasting thing is a process. It isn't just like sitting down and eating a steak. It is, you're gonna go through certain steps that he's trying to teach him, I guess.
Yeah.
You know.
But I think this is like telling a story to someone, and they're just like humoring you, because they just want to be done with the story so they can get to the meal or get to whatever they want to get to, And so I see that with Jack. And so it's a great point you bring up that like it's different when you want to learn versus you're just humoring the other person so you can get to where you want to get to.
How would you rate this one, Miles?
Well, usually they start you on wines with learning disabilities, but this one is pretty damn good. This is the new one. Right, Chris?
Just released about 2 months ago.
Nice job.
What we see, and this is, I think, really, really key, and I think it's a small thing. We see it throughout the film, and it's really important, which is that it's very clear that to Chris, the guy who works at the winery, respects Miles's opinion, and Miles respects Chris. And I think this is one piece of the antidote to the snobbery is that there are people who really, really know wine, and they recognize other people who really, really know wine and respect them. And so that's not being a snob. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's not being exclusionary. In fact, he and the guy who works at the winery, they're in the same club, as we're going to see with a bunch of other people later on, who are all share this real passion for wine.
Jack tells Miles he could work in a wine store, which Miles considers for a second before staring dead straight back at Jack with a slight look of shock on his face and says,
"Are you chewing gum?"
Which is a great button to the scene.
That's a great button. Totally, totally.
So let me ask you the question. Who came up with this idea? Because it seems like this is Miles's idea of how to entertain Jack in a bachelor weekend. And I'm shocked that Jack doesn't have any other friends he can go and do a bachelor party weekend, which would probably be filled with strippers and prostitutes and drugs, and instead decides to go on this trip with Miles. Do you think he does this because of their friendship? Do you think he does this because he has no friends, or because he respects Miles greatly, or knows that Miles is essentially in a 2-year depression since his divorce? Why do you think, who came up with this idea, and why do you think Jack agreed to it?
I don't think it's possible that Jack has a whole bunch of other friends.
You don't? As an actor? Pretty actor like him. Okay.
It has nothing to do with him being an actor or him being pretty. I mean, for him to go on this trip with Miles as his bachelor week, he would go on the trip you described. Of course he'd go to Vegas with a bunch of dudes and go, of course now maybe he already did that. Maybe that happened the week before and Miles wasn't invited or something. Maybe, but him making this choice, I think I think part of him does care about Miles, and that is part of what's going on. B, he is 100% focused that he's going to figure out how to get laid. And I think I think part of him is like, I don't care about wine. I like to drink. Right. And if following Miles through his winery leads me to drink a lot of places and hopefully meet girls, then that's what I'm going to do. And I will humor him with all the snobby wine stuff, you know?
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's a great point. And I'll be out of town so I can cheat without getting caught. Yeah.
Right. And I don't have, because if you do go with a cadre of guys, well, then if you did have the bachelor party, maybe you had to have Christine's Armenian two brothers and her cousin go with you to the party, and you had to be well behaved.
Maybe Christine's dad would probably want to come along.
This goes to that goes to a real problem when you're trying to sow your royal oats.
The royal oats. All right, so this is what to know about Paul Giamatti. He said, I had virtually no knowledge of wine before the movie and didn't drink it much, and I still don't know diddly about it and don't drink it at all now. And he told this to the Hollywood Reporter when talking about the movie, because they just had the 20th anniversary celebrations. I'm not even sure what wine is what color. I feel badly because I disappoint fans and sommeliers all the time. I like Guinness and tequila, not together, of course, separately. So it was Alexander Payne who had discovered wine and was motivated to do a film about wine here, Cine-Files, I think they call it. But Giamatti didn't. So the fact that he can deliver these lines so believably and feels like this knowledgeable about wine, again, speaks to the brilliance of his talent, because you are so invested in how he's explaining wine. Because this film exploded wine culture, and people got into wine in massive levels because of this movie. And I think a massive reason for that is because of the believability of Miles and how he's explaining how to appreciate wine. We cut to them in the car, again, driving now through Solvang, California. They end up in Buellton, California, checking into their hotel room. And later we see them walking down the highway dressed for dinner. Now, Steve, we rarely talk about costumes, but I think in this film, the costume choices here are so good because they really convey the personalities of these two gentlemen. Miles has his button-down shirt tucked into his dress pants with his dress shoes on. Jack is wearing khaki sneakers and an oversized button-down shirt with two pockets, with one button unbuttoned at the top of the collar and a big collar there to get attention from people. And I think this is a great encapsulation of each of their personalities. One tight-lipped and one way more loose.
I think that blousy blouse that Jack is wearing, that sort of just slightly kind of baggy, untucked shirt, it just says so much. And the kind of mussed hair and everything. I totally agree. The costuming is perfect.
You think I'm making a mistake marrying Christine?
Whoa.
Do you think I'm doing the right thing, Miles? Tell me the truth. I mean, you've been there.
Well, I think that you waited for some good reason and that you proposed to Christine for some good reason. So I think it's great.
Jack tells Miles that Christine's dad is wanting to get him into his property business, which is good since it took him a long time to get over him not being Armenian, which is a thing I imagine. He could take the job, but still squeeze in an audition or two, which is really the lie that actors tell themselves all the time when they take actual jobs.
So here's my question for you.
Okay.
So we've talked a lot about Miles's lack of a writing career.
Yes.
And Jack, lying about whether or not he's getting published and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How's Jack's acting career going?
Well, he tells us the fact that he is doing voiceovers and hasn't been on screen in a bit. That he tells us that later. I think in a few minutes he tells us that this is when they meet up with everybody and talk about his career. He is a guy who has gone to voiceovers, and Alexander Payne and Thomas Haden Church both talk about this in interviews. That this is where Thomas Haden Church was in his own life as an actor. He had been a lead, or he had been a series regular on Wings. He had been in some movies, and of course, this is before Spider-Man and the Sandman situation. But he had stopped booking stuff on a consistent basis and had become a voiceover artist. And so the things he's talking about, 5.9% interest, that was legitimately what his career had been in at the time when he was cast in this movie. Because Thomas Haden says he had given up being in a theatrical film by this point because he hadn't been booking roles consistently theatrically. So he had gone into voiceover. So I think in his career right now, there is a sense of desperation, because the fact that Mrs. Raymond brought it up and he wasn't too happy about it tells me that it only reminds him that he's not where he wants to be.
Well, and I'll add to that I think just as Jack lies about Miles and lies about everything, he's lying about his career. Whatever he says about the voiceover work that he's getting, it's 30 or 40% worse than that.
Yeah.
I actually think because the whole thing about getting in on the property business is, I think Jack's actually in a desperate situation. I actually think I think it's not just that he needs the marriage for emotional reasons and loves Christine, which let's say that he does or whatever.
Sure.
I think this is a stable financial future that he is marrying into.
I think that's 100% the truth. And let's be honest, because clearly it seems like he has wanted to be an actor he's been an actor and wanted to be an actor for a long time. This is him also in a way giving up on his dream by accepting this job to work for Christine's dad, because actors, as I said, actors always lie to themselves. Well, I can sneak off at lunch hour and go to audition, or like he says later, I could always drive up for 2 hours for it. I tell you this, I don't even drive up for a premiere 2 hours to go watch a movie. I would never drive up 2 hours for an audition unless it was a big audition. Yeah. So these are the lies we tell ourselves as actors when we start to glimpse that the career is pretty much over and you've got to find a way to make money. And when an opportunity presents itself, you really have to say to yourself, okay, I have to walk away from acting and do this instead. And I think this is the place he's in right now in this movie.
Right.
Well, they walk into the hitching post, which has a slogan that reads "World's Best Steaks." And I think Elf is going to pop out and try that out, but no. But here's a little background on the hitching post. Rex Pickett, who is the author of Sideways, said that Frank Ostini, who is the owner of the hitching post, quote, got a hold of the screenplay and thought it would be bad for the area. So he called everyone together and tried to shut down the film. Several wineries made the final decision not to participate, but in a last-minute change of heart, Ostini opted back in, and the hitching post ended up serving as one of the film's most memorable shooting locations and is now an essential destination on the wine circuit because of this movie. So,
wow, that's a weird move on his part.
Well, a lot of people thought this was going to bring unwanted attention to their area, and people kind of, there's a snobbery, right? We just finished talking off mic about A Complete Unknown, and what's one of the things that comes into that film is this: we have to protect folk music exactly as it is. Who is this guy who was on our team who now wants to go electric? I think there's an energy here where they wanted to kind of protect their little pocket of how they did things. And if you bring more people into it, it commercializes and changes everything. And I think there's that sense that they didn't want that to happen with a movie like this. maybe they sensed the movie was going to be good and they were afraid of how much it would change their area. But
it's not the protest the protest is interesting in and of itself. It's the last minute switch to put your restaurant in the film. That's the wait, did you manipulate all these people to back out so that you could get all the attention?
That's a great point, Steve. That is a great point. Maybe he did. Yeah, people are ruthless in business. Well, they end up at the bar there at the Hitching Post, and Gary the bartender, played by Patrick Gallagher.
Miles, sir. Long time no see.
Very nice to see you.
Hey, when's your novel coming out? We all want to read it.
Soon. Say, this is my buddy Jack. He's getting married next week.
My condolences, man.
According to Thomas Haden Church, Patrick Gallagher went to school with Sandra Oh, and that's how he got this gig. He's so great in this small part. And of course, he goes on to be in all sorts of stuff. Master and Commander, he's in Entourage, he's in Glee, Night at the Museum, Battlestar Galactica, ton of TV. But again, he just feels like the kind of character you meet behind a bar in a place like this. You know what I mean? Like a super solid guy who has seen a whole bunch of stuff, also knows wine, knows Miles. And I just think he totally sells this location because he's such a great character actor.
I agree, yeah. And he's a guy that I also had no idea about, does voiceovers for video games, because he's in one of my favorite video games, Ghost of Tsushima. And so that's Tsushima. That's an incredible job he does as Khotun Khan in that game as well. So, and of course, Attila the Hun in Night at the Museum. So really, really cool stuff from Patrick Gallagher. An interesting and unusual Canadian actor for sure.
So, what do you think?
Tighter than a nun's asshole, but good concentration. Nice fruit. Pour us a couple, eh?
Jack just says, trying to, I guess, go along with him and by saying, it's tight. And then we cut to them sitting at a table, and Jack asks Miles to check out that chick, and that chick is Maya, played by Virginia Madsen.
They're all so good in this movie, but she's the heart to me. Like she delivers on something that's really, really tough in this film, and I think she's so great. I did not realize she was in the original Kenny Loggins Footloose video.
Yes, she was.
And all sorts of stuff in the 80s. She's in David Lynch's Dunes. She's in Creator with Peter O'Toole. She's Rainmaker, all the way to Star Trek Voyager, tons of TV, astronaut farmer. She has had a long, long career where I do not think that she gets enough roles like this where she can really shine and show what she can do.
Yeah, and of course, she's the lead in Candyman, which a lot of people, she had the cult status of that, and a lot of people looked to her for her comments on the recent passing of Tony Todd, who played Candyman, and she delivered a wonderful tribute to him. And so a really soulful, genuinely fantastic person and genuinely fantastic actress. And when Alexander Payne was asked why he cast her, he said, there's something about Virginia. And you know what? It was even present in her 8x10 photo. There's something present in her eyes, which that she looks at you and she listens and then she thinks and then she speaks. Not a lot of people do that. Plus, there was something where just looking at her, she communicates so much life experience, and she was willing to do the film with no makeup and play up her age and all of that. And I appreciated her boldness.
She's great. I really think she's great in this film.
Yeah.
She's incredibly hot.
Yes, she is, and nice, and married. Check out The Rock.
No, that doesn't mean shit. When Christine worked at Sushi Roku, she wore a big engagement ring to keep guys from hitting on her. Think it worked? Fuck no.
Which is how Jack met her, because Jack, of course, ignored the ring and hit on her anyway.
Well, hey, Miles.
Oh, hi,
It's
Maya.
good to see you.
How are you?
I'm good. Good. You look great. Did you lose some weight?
No, actually. But you?
Miles is clearly awkward here. He's almost doing the Ricky Bobby thing where he doesn't know what to do with his hands and his body language and his movements. She asks if they've been out tasting, and he introduces Jack to Maya. She says, of course, they say yes. Jack says, hiya. And you see Maya quickly size up Jack with that response and only gives him a hi. So this is a great introduction to Maya and Virginia Madsen. She clearly has a connection and affection for Miles. And I think Jack tries to hit on her as an idiot would try to hit on a woman of intelligence. And she just kind of shoots him down in a very quick, hurt way. But you can tell there's a connection here with Miles.
I think Jack thinks that hitting on a woman is just a complimentary way to talk to a woman, that it's a nice thing to do. That's what I think Jack thinks.
Yeah.
I also think that it's just what you said, is that she sums him up instantly. But I think right from here, you see that she genuinely likes Miles.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't seem fake. It seems like, no, she is genuinely interested in him, and you could see that he is interested in her and very uncomfortable and shy and doesn't know what to do.
It's kind of sweet, the connection they have,
Jesus, she's jamming. And she's obviously into you. What else do you know about her?
Well, she does know a lot about wine.
Ah, now we're getting somewhere.
But before he can entertain the idea too much, Miles says,
she's a fucking waitress in Buellton, Jack. How is that ever going to work out?
And here's something where Jack now takes the higher road in a way, and Jack calls Miles out for being a dick and focusing on the negative and for being blind to how into him Maya is. And Miles tries to diffuse this exchange and says,
I can also recommend the ostrich steak. Very lean, locally raised.
Well, we're going to run into those ostriches later on. I think too, the fucking waitress in Buellton, can be interpreted several different ways. One of them is just really disparaging of weight, like she's beneath him.
Yes.
Which I actually don't think is what Miles is saying. I think what Miles is saying is, I live in San Diego. She's a waitress in Buellton. How could this possibly work out? Like, it's about the price. And to Jack, that's meaningless, because Jack's like, well, you can get laid now. Like, what difference does it make? Right. The goal is to get laid. Therefore, what her job is or where she works is meaningless. Why are you always so negative?
Great point, Steve. We wipe to the guys at the bar later. When Maya walks up to get a drink, Jack says it's on them. Miles, after having been prodded by Jack earlier to do more, asks Maya if she'd like to join them. She agrees. She walks over, asks how it's going with the book.
I finished it.
Good for you. Wow.
It's getting published.
Which you clearly see Miles is unhappy about again, and lies that is the reason that they are up here celebrating, because he doesn't want to tell anybody that he's up there celebrating his impending marriage. She says, congratulations, that's fantastic. And they cheer. They have a cheers as Miles gives Jack a quick look of like, you fucker.
So what are you guys up to tonight?
Oh, we're pretty wiped. I think we're just going to go back to the motel and crash.
Which brings a subtly disdainful look from Jack there that we see in the foreground of the framing of that scene. And the scene stops cold. So, Steve, what happened here? Because we end up with them walking back on the highway and Jack is pissed at Miles. So clearly there was an opportunity here and Miles was too nervous to take it and Jack is super pissed.
I think you definitely answered your own question. That is exactly what happened there. I think what's great is you have two moments where you can see one character say a thing and the other character react negatively. So one is, the book is being published. That's why we're here celebrating.
Yeah.
So that's a multi-tiered lie, because that's not why they're here. They're here because he's getting married. This is the beginning of him hiding the fact that he's getting married.
Yeah.
And we already know that Miles doesn't want to talk about the book being published. He doesn't want that lie out there. So and then we have exactly the same moment when she says, hey, what are you up to? And he goes, oh, we're wiped out. I mean, it's just like, dude, attractive woman says, what are you up to? You say, nothing. What are you up to? Or we're just thinking about doing we're having some plans, go drinks, but come on, man. Yeah. Even I know that.
But this is the psychological game that's going on with Miles, right? Because this stage in his life right now, he is a depressed guy who's still in love with his ex-wife. His novel is waiting to be published, although he suspects it's not going to be published, I imagine. And that's kind of an undercurrent that is coursing through him right now. And this opportunity presents itself. This is not when Miles is riding a high and feeling confident he's got a book published. Because I think if he'd had the book published, he'd have been all over Maya in terms of setting stuff up and hanging out with her and doing whatever. He feels he's not attractive right now because he's not successful right now. He's teaching to 8th graders. He hasn't sold a book. He's living in that 1-bedroom apartment, which doesn't look that well kept. And so there's a little shame here on his side. Aside from the logistics of it all, of like where she lives and he lives, It's more a matter that he doesn't feel attractive. So he's not picking up on the cues that he would normally maybe pick up on if he was feeling a little bit better about himself. So I think this is also a window of how hesitant he is to open this door again to possibly caring about somebody.
The girl is looking to party, and you tell her we're going back to the motel and crash. Jesus, Miles.
Well, I'm tired, Jack. Aren't you tired?
The chick digs you, man. She lit up like a pinball machine when she found out your novel was getting published.
Yeah, now I have another lie to live down. Thanks, Jack.
Just trying to get you a little action. I would appreciate a little bit of help. And by the way, I was right. She's not married.
How do you know?
No rock. When she came to the bar, she was sans rock.
So Jack was right, Steve, in a way.
Yeah.
So maybe he knows more about women than
I think he's totally right about Maya. Totally right about Maya.
And now, Steve, it's Monday.
I'm going to get my nut on this trip, Miles, and you are not going to fuck it up for me with all of your depression and anxiety and neckhead downer shit.
Oh, well, now the cards are on the table.
Yes, they are.
I find Jack to be an extremely irritating person in all sorts of ways. I think Miles needs him.
Yes.
Because he needed someone to call him on this. I mean, the thing with Mom saying, when are you going to get married again, was obviously ham-fisted and not effective.
Right.
But he is in a bad place, and someone does need to call him on it. It also lays out like Jack's main purpose was not to come on this trip to spend time with his friend Miles. Yeah. It wasn't to learn about wine tasting or play some golf. It was to get laid. That's why Jack's here.
And now it's becoming very clear that Jack is determined to make this happen, and which is why I think he uses such rude terms to describe Miles, calls out Miles. Because, Steve, you know this, no one else can push your button better than your family or someone who's known you for a very long time. They know exactly what buttons to push when they're frustrated or when they're angry.
I am going to get laid before I get married on Saturday. Do you read me?
Sure, big guy, absolutely. Loud and clear, whatever you say. It's your party, evidently. Why don't you just why don't you just go out and I'll catch a train back.
No, Miles. Man, this is our week to get crazy. We should both be cutting loose. This could be our last chance. This is our week, man.
So I know it could be easy to look at Jack as kind of like a soulless woman hound, for lack of a better term. But I think he does, in some messed up way, think he's trying to help Miles. While it also helps him, I think he's also trying to help Miles as well. So it's a much more complex approach to it in how he's presenting it. Am I off on this, or do you think I'm giving him too much?
No, I totally agree. Of course, I think he 100% wants to help Miles.
Yes.
Does that go in front of the things that he needs? Absolutely not. But he totally wants to help Miles. And I think, it's to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Yeah. And to Jack, everything looks like someone you need to nail. I mean, that's what he's really thinking about is like, I need to get laid. Therefore, that's what Miles needs. Therefore, the best thing I can do for him is to have this fun weekend, which will culminate in Jack's mind with Miles getting laid, which is in fact what happens.
I feel like Miles has an idea that I feel like Jack has an idea that him and Miles are going to end up in the same bedrooms, having sex with two different women at the same time. I don't know. Yeah. What?
Nothing. I just reacted to that.
Which was the end of my basic training. I had that happen. It was a weird experience. We cut to a wine tasting montage of images of them in 2 shots and then 4 shots in the car with vineyards in the distance. We get ostriches, as you mentioned, Steve, that are soon to become steaks. People picking the grapes, sorting them out, and basically we're seeing the process of how wine is made.
I love this multi-image montage as the images are coming in and out. We're seeing quad splits. We're seeing all these different kinds of splits. And the editor is Kevin Tent. He ended up doing, I think, just about all of Alexander Payne's films, all the way up to The Holdovers. And I think this is, it's a beautiful bit of storytelling. It looks amazing. I think this is part of why people traveled to this location so much after this, because they really highlight the beauty of this wine country. And I also want to point out, I don't know for certain, that this was edited on an Avid on a computer.
Oh,
but it almost has to be. To do this kind of multi-image thing, this would be super hard if you're just cutting on film. And this is 2004 is when that transition is really, it starts in the late 90s. And by the mid 2000s, more and more movies are being cut on a computer. And that's, I think, what makes this possible.
Yeah. And I think another thing to add to this moment is something we haven't mentioned yet, Steve. The score of this film really comes to bear in this sequence as well. And this is Rolf Kent, who has been scoring stuff for Alexander Payne since they met in 1991. That's how far back they go. And Alexander is a very opinionated guy when you read him in interviews. And he said, I don't always like Rolf's scores, but I always find something to like, even if I don't like the overall score. But in this score, he absolutely nailed it. And for him, he wanted a jazzy type of score throughout the whole movie. And he was inspired by a collaboration that Chet Baker made with another artist. And that album kind of inspired him to push that on Rolf. And that's what Rolf came up with. And I think this sequence really highlights that music as well as highlighting the editing here. So, which we haven't talked about the music, which is my fault. But I thought the music in this movie is fantastic. What do you think?
Great.
Yeah.
I love it. I think it's beautiful. I think it's got this great jazzy, and it's the music for Sideways. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It so perfectly fits the size and the location of the film.
Yeah.
It just sits right in there, Right. I think the score is fantastic.
And then we hear them talking with all the employees of the vineyards as they taste the wines until they get to one particular employee of a vineyard who Jack compliments with a...
Now there's a girl that knows how to pour. What's your name?
Stephanie.
Stephanie. Nice.
Played by Sandra Oh, Alexander Payne's wife at the time.
Want to know what I wrote down at this point as I'm watching the film? Everyone is so young. I mean, it's just Sandra Oh, and she's young. She's absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, beautiful. And it's funny. She, like Thomas Haden Church, like Virginia Madsen, are people that I had seen a lot. I knew Sandra Oh. I'd seen her in all sorts of stuff. She's obviously Canadian, trained in acting. And I think she had a deal with her parents that was sort of like, okay, I'll try it for a little while because they really wanted her to do something more responsible. I think I first started seeing her in Arliss. I think that's when I first kind of became aware of her.
Right.
And of course, she's on Grey's Anatomy forever. She's the lead in Killing Eve, which I've never seen, but I've heard is fantastic. And she's in all sorts of other stuff. Princess Diaries, Under the Tuscan Sun, voice work in Raya the Last Dragon, which is a movie that people don't talk about very much, but I really like.
Yeah.
And as you said, at this time, she was dating and briefly married to Alexander Payne.
Yeah, I had no idea who she was till this movie. And then this movie kind of woke me up to her. And then, of course, she gets ER a few years later. And I imagine this movie is a reason why she got that, because she was so good in this film and stood out. And, of course, has that great moment where she beats Jack with a motorcycle helmet. And this is a great introduction. Like, right off the bat, you sense that he's found his willing partner in all of this.
So, do you live around here, Stephanie?
Yeah, up around Los Alamos. And I agree with you about Cab Franc.
We're just over in Buellton, the Windmill Inn.
Oh, yeah?
Do you happen to know a gal named Maya that works at the Itchy
Yeah,
Bus?
sure. Yeah, I know Maya.
Yeah, no shit.
Real well, yeah.
Oh, we had a drink with her last night.
And Miles senses what Jack is doing here, cuts him off, and asks if they can move to the Syrah. Stephanie chides him a bit for chomping at the bit and then pours them a healthy pour of the Syrah. Jack says,
"You are a bad, bad girl, Stephanie."
And Stephanie, entering the ring with Jack, says,
I know I need to be spanked.
And it's on, Steve.
It is so, I know I need to be spanked. Come on. Let it as honest as can be. And look, she's beautiful, sexy as hell. And there is many shots of Jack checking people out.
Yeah.
And there is certainly one that happens now as Stephanie walks away. It is 100% on.
Yeah, and I think this is Stephanie's way of throwing the bait out there too, because she walks away from them. She excuses herself so Jack can watch her walk away. And then we cut outside to Miles in a side close-up. Let me ask you as a director, Steve. Now, this is an interesting film, right? Because there are close-ups used in certain ways by Alexander Payne in this movie that I think are interesting, intentional. They give us so much more of the inner life of these actors and these characters. And what have you about in the film. And it helps the story. It helps us now kind of connect to these people more and more without any dialogue being spoken. And I think this moment here is an example of that because Miles is in close-up, but he's in close-up to the right of the frame. So we can see in the distance Jack walking toward him with 2 cases of wine, which he eventually puts in the trunk. But we can tell that Miles is clearly unhappy and unsettled. And now Jack has found his thing. He's about to go cheat. So tell me what you think is going on with Miles and why Alexander would put Giamatti in this kind of a close-up to the right of the frame as a director.
I think when people talk about great visual directors, they always look for the spectacular things, the amazing shot, the incredible tracking shot, the showy stuff. Yeah. And that stuff is great. But I think throughout this entire film, Alexander Payne manages to put the camera in exactly the right spot. Yeah. This is not my strong suit. As I've said many times, cinematography is not where I excel at all. And like the idea of just like that shot, it's exactly as you described, which is we have that profile shot of him in the foreground, right side of frame. And we can see like he's uncomfortable about the lies that are happening. Yes. He's uncomfortable. And then it's really uncomfortable about the fact that Maya was brought up because that goes right into his vulnerability. And so, and the contrast of his pensive, sad, looking down profile shot with the excited Thomas Haden Church that we left all that space on the left side of frame for him to come running up with those boxes. That shot tells the story without anything else. Yeah. Fantastic.
It's fantastic. I agree with you. The Maya thing, absolutely. But also Jack has made him complicit now in the cheating on his fiancée. And although he has said it, he has actually done it. And this is now the door opening. And I think Miles is also pondering that as he sits there, like how much of this am I going to have to hide? How much of this am I going to be responsible for? So in his mind, and maybe even bringing up the fact that, as we find out later, that he had cheated on his wife, maybe that is some of the thoughts he's having in that moment as well. So an interesting framing that I think, as you said, Steve, so well works to give us more about these 2 characters.
So we're on.
What?
Yeah. She called Maya, who's not working tonight, so we're all going out.
With Maya?
Yeah. She's been divorced a year now, buddy.
And once again, chastises Miles for almost cock-blocking him by revealing his upcoming marriage. And we cut to a quick driving scene here, and they end up at a clearing with a view.
Victoria and I used to like this view. You know, once we had a picnic here, and we drank a 95 Opus 1. With smoked salmon and artichokes, but we didn't care. Oh, man. She has the best palate of any woman I've ever known.
And Jack, who has clearly been bothered by something here, we see him in the frame, takes this moment to slowly tell Miles that Victoria is coming to the wedding, which Miles knows, but then adds that she got remarried.
She what? When?
About a month ago. Maybe 6 weeks.
To that guy, the guy with the restaurant?
I mean, dude, this moment, like, so Jack has known this for a long time, obviously, right?
Clearly, yeah.
Yeah. And he's thought to himself, at some point on this trip, I need to tell him this thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess there's certain things where there is no good time to tell someone a thing.
Sure.
I don't think Jack has picked a particularly good time at all.
I don't think Jack would know a good time to tell anybody at any stage of his life.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so fucking brutal that the way that Jack handles this is just so awful, particularly because if Jack's goal is to get laid or to get Miles laid, this was the wrong time to tell him this piece of information. You know?
Right.
This is potentially derailing. So totally not caring about Miles at all. This was a bad choice for Jack, derailing potentially his entire week, you know.
Oh, milk was a bad choice. What I like, Steve, about this situation, and we have to at times as film viewers, film watchers, is we have to stop at times being like, oh, they should have done this or he should have done that. Life is messy. And what makes Alexander Payne's movies so fun to watch is that he doesn't shy away from the messiness. He doesn't try to give you the perfect moment. He tries to show you what actually happens in real life with human beings. And I'm sure quite a few people have had this experience who might be listening to us now, where they had to tell someone something and they just didn't know when to do it and blurted it out, or they were the person receiving the news and the person who told it to them told it at the wrong time. And these are two supremely fucked up people. So why would they be able to find the right moment to have this exchange? That being said, I actually do think it's the right moment to have this exchange because the door has been opened with Maya now with a double date, which is in essence what Jack has lined up. So in order to go through with this double date in a way that is possibly slightly open for Miles is for for him to know that Victoria has moved on and remarried, that the door is really closed. And so for Miles, this is probably the wrong time to get it for us looking at it, but it might be the right time for him as the character to receive it because this idea of Maya now is somewhat open. And so hearing this news about Victoria shocks him, but it might be shocking in a good way. I don't know.
So I'll separate this into two things. One thing is the human thing, and the other thing is the filmmaking thing.
Yeah.
On the filmmaking thing, like you were saying, like, well, why does this character do this now, and shouldn't they do this? There's a certain. I think it is really important as a writer to be able to defend your choices and to say, understand your characters and say they did this now for this reason, and that is important. There is a certain point where you're getting notes where the actual response is, you know why? Because that's what this character did.
Yep.
That's what they did. This is maybe another character would have done something different. This character did this.
Yeah.
And on the human thing, the thing we have to remember, there is no good time.
Yeah.
There is no good time to tell Miles that the ex that he would like to get back with has gotten remarried. Yeah. They're all bad times. Now, maybe there was a better time than this.
Yeah.
Or a better way to do it, but they all were going to be terrible. It's all terrible. There's no way Miles can take this in a way that's not really, really sad because it's really sad. It's going to mess him up, you know?
And Jack is considerate because, well, let me ask you this. Is he being considerate or is he like afraid a little bit that he has to, he knows he has to do it. He doesn't want to do it. Just like being in the, hanging out with Stephanie's family before they left. Is this a situation here where Jack knows he has to do it now and he's finally hit that moment where he's been caught and he kind of just has to reveal all this now because he's been holding on to it? And maybe in some fucked up way, he thought he would never have to reveal it and someone else would do it instead of him.
I am sure Jack is definitely a person who's like, if I don't do it, maybe it's all going to work itself out and then I get away with it. Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, Jack is not a deep guy. He is a shallow guy.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean he doesn't care about Miles. He actually does care about Miles.
Right.
You know, does his own needs go in front of that over and over again? Totally does. But he does care.
And this is fast. Again, this is great acting because Paul Giamatti takes Miles and goes full teenager. He cocks his head to the side and almost pout marches to the car, gets in the passenger seat instead of the driver's seat, and asks Jack to take him home.
I'd like to go home now.
Miles, get out of the car.
Would you drive me back to the motel, please?
And then Miles yells at Jack.
Why didn't you tell me about this before, Jack?
Because I knew you'd get so freaked out that you wouldn't even come on this trip. But then I thought this is the perfect place to tell you. We're here to forget about all that shit. We're here to party, man.
So I guess makes sense in Jack's mind. But Miles worries about what he's going to be looking like at the wedding. He goes, I'm going to be a fucking pariah, persona non grata. Everybody's just going to be holding their breath, waiting to see if I get drunk and make a scene, which of course brought to mind the Jerry Maguire. I'm not going to make a scene like everyone thinks I'm going to.
And the fact is, that's probably true.
Yes.
He's correct. People are going to be worried about what he's going to do.
Yeah, and he certainly isn't going to dissuade those fears later on when he calls her on the payphone, which we're going to get to maybe in part 2. But Jack thinks he can solve this.
I talked to Victoria, okay? She's cool. Everybody's cool.
I'm sorry, you've been talking...
Jumps out of the car.
Behind my back? You've been talking about it?
Steve, have you ever been in this position? Because I know I have. Have you ever been in this position where someone is talking to you about the other person and you're kind of being roped into this situation unwantingly?
Oh, yeah. The you've been talking about me behind my back thing is It is the worst. It is the way. Well, this is the thing. I think it reveals something is that Miles is capable of thinking about other people's emotions from their perspectives.
Yeah.
Like far too much, probably.
Yeah.
And that is paralyzing to him because he's thinking about what everybody else is thinking about him.
Yeah.
Right? Jack is really only capable of seeing things from Jack's perspective.
Yeah.
You know, like he doesn't have that I jump in and see this, and he doesn't really care that much about other people's perspectives. So he can't see what it's going to feel like to Miles to make him totally hyper aware of everybody's feeling about him about this moment. Like Jack can't see it, and Miles, it's like the worst possible. It took what was already a shitty situation and magnified it like 1,000 times now.
Miles now grabs a bottle from Jack's stash, rips the cork out with his teeth, and takes off down the hill, taking swigs from the bottle as Jack chases him down.
Come back here.
Miles! So out of nowhere, we're now into a bit of Benny Hill random physical comedy. A lot of people have likened this to a Little House on the Prairie shot, or the reverse of the Seventh Seal shot of them marching into death. But he said no. Alexander Payne said he'd never seen an episode of A Little House on the Prairie, so that was not an influence on this shot. And he didn't address the Seventh Seal thing. And he said it's stolen from a film school friend's thesis film back in UCLA. I called him up and even asked him if I could steal that shot. Interesting. What do you think of this shot here, Steve? Is them running down the hill?
I think they had to get stuntmen, although I don't think they actually used the stuntmen, but because Paul and Tom said that it was much steeper than it looks. I think it's just it manages to do this thing that I love, which is when you can have a moment that is simultaneously genuinely emotional, and really, really funny. Because this is really funny watching these guys run down the hill with him clutching his bottle of wine, you know, but like the moment of what Miles is going through is real and feels real.
I think it's smart to put it here too, Steve, because we know these are man children, right? That haven't really grown up. And so it's believable that Miles would rip a bottle out, rip the cork out, and then drink as he runs, and Jack would run after him. You know, so these are two kids like running away from something that they don't want to deal with, or at least Miles doesn't want to deal with, and the other one's trying to make him come to terms with it. And it allows you as the audience to not slide into this maudlin place, right? It allows it to have a little bit of humor while making it believable. Like you could actually think these two guys would do this kind of nonsense. So there's a bit of levity that comes back to the film after this really powerfully poignant reveal, you know? They run and eventually run out of gas because they're both probably not in the best shape. And then eventually walk through the vineyards as the music gets melancholy and sad. And we see Miles reach and caress a bushel of grapes as we fade back to them driving down the highway with Miles in a catatonic state of depression.
Do you think that these are Pinot grapes?
Yes. I think this is what leads to that monologue with Maya later on. Yes, absolutely.
He mentioned them before and described them as thin-skinned and fragile.
Yes.
And I think that just echoes so much with that's Miles. Miles is thin-skinned and fragile and needs to be taken care of. And caressing the grapes is like, it's almost like giving himself the love or showing what he needs. I need someone to caress me. I need someone to take care of me, you know?
I think it's also a touchstone, right? Like we see films every once in a while have a thing that's a touchstone that brings it all back or stabilizes the main character. And I think these Pinot grapes are that for him, what they symbolize, what they mean, you know, and it's almost like the sled, right? It's almost like the sled in Kane. It is that thing that signifies something for him that stabilizes him or normalizes him or something he's lost. That is in the sled situation with Kane that he wants to get back. And in here, it's more a matter of like, it stabilizes him and brings him back to normal, even within the madness of it all.
Well, and what did he just say? A moment before all this happened, he said he came here with Victoria and she had the best palate of anyone he ever met. And so like that is, you know, you talk about what has he lost and what are the symbolisms of and what, you know what he actually has to do in the course of this movie is he has to transform his connection to grapes and wine from Victoria to Maya.
Yes. Yes. And hopefully have a much more fruitful relationship, pun intended, than he had with Victoria. So
I think maybe one that matures into a fine wine.
There you go. And on that perfect joke, I think it's a perfect time to end part 1 of our discussion of Sideways. I hope I am doing it justice, you all. This is a film that absolutely overwhelmed me, and I'm taking it beat by beat. And thankfully, I have a great partner in Steve Morris who is helping me as I lead through this one. But thank you all so much for listening to part 1 of our discussion of Sideways, Steve.
And of course, if we'd love to hear your thoughts, not only on Sideways, but maybe some of your favorite wines or wineries or some road trips that you've gone on with a friend, you can go to our Facebook page. Just do a search for the Cine-Files. On Twitter, we're Cine_Files, the Cine-Files podcast. On Instagram, you can subscribe to the show at all the usual places. If you're on Apple Podcasts and have a moment to leave a review, that would be fantastic. If you're on Spotify, you can leave reviews there or even comments on individual episodes, which is great. There's some great discussions happening there. You can buy or stream Sideways along with every other movie we've ever reviewed at cinephiles.net. You could support the show, as we said at the beginning of the show, at patreon.com/thecinephiles or on Apple Podcasts, where you can get ad-free versions of the show or listen to our Cine-Files shorts. And if you want to reach me, it's SR Morris on Twitter and Blue Sky, SR Morris1 on Instagram. John, how would people reach you?
Yes, you can always find me at The Rocha Says on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky, as Steve said. And my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Rocha Says, here as we go into 2025. Really want to get to that 50,000 subscribers mark. We've crossed 36,000, so please help us over there. A lot of great content going on over there. And Steve and I, right on the precipice of doing our conversation on the Best Picture films that are going to be nominated here. I think January 17th, depending on the fires and when they, if they move the announcements or not, we'll know who the Best Picture nominees are. And Steve and I will do our Best Picture series as we go and revisit every nominee for that category. So please head on over there to youtube.com/John Rocha Says and my other podcasts, the Hot Mic and the Geek Buddies. Thank you.
And I think that's it for this week. We'll be back to continue our exploration of Sideways right here on the Cine-Files.